A young man named sits across from a bishop at the start of a new story, unable to comprehend what he is being told. On the other hand, the bishop was certain that understood exactly what he was saying. However, it appeared that actually didn't comprehend anything. There was a brief pause before the bishop clarified that he was referring to but didn't care about that name. Then, after spending so much time in the same room, the elderly man lost control and yelled at that the bishop was referring to a person by the name of. After giving it some thought, understood who they were referring to. However, the man had not comprehended since had transformed into. Abruptly, he recalled that the bishop had told him about a who had turned into yesterday, but he had been too indolent to pay attention. Made the decision to ask a question in order to get clarification. Is Mr. In response, the bishop said that Master was about to embark on a quest to acquire strength and take on the demon lord once more. But given how quickly he moves, the bishop assumed that he would tire out and give up around halfway through. Concurred with the bishop after hearing this. The bishop went on to say that would find it boring to travel alone, so he asked the bishop to find him companions. Realized where this was going at that point. He wanted to leave in style and didn't want to go anywhere. He justified this by claiming that he still needed to put in a little more work in the fields. However, the bishop quickly intervened to stop the boy. He asserted that had selected him and had previously expressed his desire to travel the world. However, was baffled as to why it had to be him. He wasn't a coward, mind you. However, was just a regular farmer who had to put in a lot of effort and pay a lot of taxes in order to survive in this corrupt society. The bishop then made the decision to compromise with. He committed to discussing his tax exemption with the church. In addition, would receive a stipend that would pay for all of his expenses while he was with the hero in the capital. Naturally, the bishop also pledged to inform the capital about his accomplishment. Was intrigued by this alluring offer. He acknowledged that he understood everything and said he would act as escort. The swiftness with which the crafty changed his mind astounded the bishop. The tale of two heroes thus commences. The same bishop who had conversed with once came up to and claimed to be rather than. Naturally, the boy was shocked to learn of this. He should have a mark on his right hand, the bishop explained. Only those selected by the divine Holy Grail bear that mark. The mark, according to the bishop, was proof of what he had said. Then recognized that he had been selected by God as he examined the mark on his hand, which he did have. A dark-haired head suddenly emerged from the throng. His parents approached him at that time and offered him support. His father informed him that he had known this day would arrive ever since he had discovered. The father said sadly that would no longer have time to waste his life in this little village going forward. It made sad because he still hadn't been able to pay his parents back. They told him, however, that he was the best young man they had ever met. He was urged to have faith that he was his village's pride and honor. Still found it extremely difficult to say goodbye to those he cared about. One elderly man realized that he had not actually come here when he suddenly remembered. The elderly man was baffled as to why he had been selected for this position. However, did show up. Even though he and are the only people in the village who share the same age, they hardly ever talk to one another. However, was aware that was different from the other villagers. Just did not comprehend that man. Although he was unable to assist, it was clear from his actions and demeanor that he had no connection to anything. It should be mentioned that a storm known as the Demon Lord strikes the world every few hundred years. His actions threaten to wipe out everything in their path as a wave of chaos and devastation rips through the world, and the Demon Lord can only be stopped by the God selected. This time intended to be the hero who would save the world, just like the heroes in his parents' old stories. He is, after all, the village's pride. But discovered that who was seated across from him in the carriage was far stranger than he had initially believed. Asked what he wanted after noticing that he was staring at him. Responded with a single word, nothing, was depressed. The fact that the capital was still a long way away did not sit well with him. Chose to continue the discussion by stating that since the roads are now safe, he thought they would arrive in the capital unharmed. Then made the decision to discuss the church guys. They are very stubborn, he said, so he didn't think this was worth it. However, relied on because he couldn't recall the last time he had failed him. These remarks amused because they came from a man who is superior to him in every way. However, did not believe that he was superior to. The bishop then turned to the carriage and told the boys that they were getting close to the capital. The young people then gazed out of the carriage and saw his capital. His carriage eventually began to travel through the capital, surveyed his surroundings, and looked out. He was astounded by the capital's splendor. Also found the capital to be beautiful. It was paradise in comparison to the village. The bishop then told the boy that he was going directly to the castle to ask to see the king. Emerged as the carriage door abruptly opened. Looking at the bishop and were perplexed. They had no idea where this young man was headed. Said he would stop here and could be located close to the church if necessary. The bishop was incensed by this statement. However, vanished into the throng of townspeople before he could raise an objection. As soon as he caught, the bishop made the firm decision to beat him. However, contrary to what the bishop thought, his decision to travel to the capital was motivated by more than just money. The man had also always wanted to go to one location. In the end, was just content to be in the city of love and take in its atmosphere. Decided that he would have a memorable first experience when he became a man after picturing a girl's chest. Therefore intended to ask any girl in the capital to have sex with him, and thankfully the boy had a large wallet. Even though it appeared foolish, she noticed a silhouette in an alley and thought it looked a lot like an information broker. Since still had guts, the guy hoped he could learn something from this person and not be intimidated. However, he heard screams all of a sudden. A young girl was yelling and pleading with the two harassing men to keep their hands off of her. Made the decision to step in, and both criminals were rendered unconscious in a matter of seconds. The girl was coming to her senses while the guy threatened to deal badly with them if they attempted to do anything, then turned to face her and inquired about her well-being. The girl thanked and replied that she was all right. Additionally, the young lady asked the man if he had made a mistake. Smugly replied, "Why did you have such a questioning tone?" After a moment of hesitation, the girl said, "He is very good at this." Was just relieved that the scoundrels had failed to harm the helpless girl. All of a sudden, noticed something really alluring. It was that girl's chest. Took a closer look and saw that it was flawless. His intense gaze caught the girl's attention and she asked if everything was okay. Gave a very serious response. "You are so gorgeous, young lady, that I was compelled to help you out of sheer admiration." The girl was extremely embarrassed to hear this. Advised her to get out of there right away because it isn't appropriate for a girl with her level of beauty. She was already blazing with shame by that point. Admitting that he had told her something no one had ever said to her before, she apologized too. A conversation going on around the corner caught the girl's attention at that precise moment. She looked around nervously to see what was going on. Sighed deeply as she realized she was alert. The man held out his hand to reassure her that everything was all right before suggesting that she leave. The girl looked down, then asked her to simply trust him this time while scratching his head. Grabbed the girl's hand without giving it much thought, despite her slight resistance. Then, while holding the girl's hand, the man started to walk away. She was stunned at first, but she closed her eyes and just trusted him. They eventually found themselves in a crowded, secure area. The girl was breathing heavily. She expressed regret too and acknowledged that she rarely walks. In that instance, advised her to take a short break and relax. After a while, was curious about what the stunning girl had forgotten in that dimly lit area. The girl was initially reluctant to share that tale with, didn't press the issue. He stated that she could choose not to tell him anything and that he was not pressuring her to do so. At first, the girl didn't believe it, but it clarified that they had already left that gloomy location, and even though he didn't know why she had been there, he continued to think that she had particular intentions. The girl then made the decision to tell everything. She clarified that she had just gotten lost and found herself in that particular district. At first, didn't think the young woman was real, however, she maintained that she was being honest. Then made the decision to shift the subject and inquire about the girl's future plans. She initially asked about it because she didn't understand what he meant. Clarified that he was asking if she had somewhere to spend the night. Using his acting prowess and playing the fool, asked the girl not to tell him that she had nowhere to go in this city. "I think it would be best for me to stay here and not go anywhere," she responded, however vehemently opposed the idea. asked the girl if she wanted to accompany him without giving it much thought, realizing that there would never be a better time. Additionally, he mentioned that he had recently arrived in the capital and was going to explore the area and take in the sights. The girl considered making such an offer. However, she quickly stated that she would be happy to go for a walk with the man. Was even embarrassed by her prompt response. After a while, the two were strolling through the city. Claimed that his friend, with whom he was not close enough to be best friends, had invited him, added the name of his friend as well. The man immediately went into contemplation after that. He came to the realization that the impact of claiming was close would be similar to that of claiming the demon lord had risen from the dead. To avoid raising any concerns, this information is typically not shared, then made the decision to shift the topic. He claimed that he had no idea why she had chosen to simply accompany him on a walk. In any event, became aware of how crowded the capital was as she strolled through the streets. The man even questioned whether this was how things were every day. Normally, it's not so crowded, but the last few days are special, his companion retorted. When heard these words, she assumed that the capital was hosting a festival, which would explain the large number of people there. However, the girl clarified that the Pope of the Church declared a week ago that a new had been selected by the divine sacred Grail and would soon arrive in the capital. Such words stunned. Naturally, though, he didn't show his companion that. Thus, the Pope told everyone in the city a week ago when the hero would be visiting the royal capital. Was shocked when she heard this. Then questioned the girl, "Is the church like that?" She responded that he was correct and that resurrection is well liked in their era. According to the girl, it minimizes public anxiety. At that moment, realized everything, and he had assumed that the hero would have a much harder time. Anyway, recommended that they just take pleasure in it. She gladly concurred. Then the two started having casual conversations and laughing. After a while, Snoopal had a feeling. A man was selling tasty meat. Came up to him and requested 2 servings of that meat. Looking at the girl next to him, the vendor asked if they were dating and if he should wrap it to go. For some reason, the girl thought of at that precise moment. The man offered his friend the meat after purchasing it. They even received a bonus from the elderly man. The girl acknowledged that she had no idea how to consume the meat on the sticks, then made the decision to show her. He didn't remove the meat from the stick, he just bit into it. The girl was taken aback to discover that she could eat it without taking it out. Then, without giving it much thought, she tried biting into it. She swallowed it and appeared to melt. She was ecstatic, saying it was the first time she had ever had food this good. Was still in shock that she had never consumed anything like this. However, because she is the queen of commoners, she insisted that it was not that easy. Following a quick snack, the two started to stroll. They enjoyed themselves and ate pastries, eventually made the decision to inquire as to whether she was enjoying herself. The girl responded that she had never had so much fun before. Encouraged her, he had the same sentiments. It started to grow dark after a while, and they were astounded by how fast time had gone by. The girl then abruptly asked if he didn't want to ask her any questions. She acknowledged this and thought must have realized she wasn't a citizen already. Acknowledged that he hadn't really wanted to inquire about it while scratching his head. The girl realized that he had already known at that point. Then went up to her and put a pendant around her neck. Surprised, the girl asked what it was after taking it in her hand. The man merely requested that she bring that memento to the celebration today. However, the girl felt that she was unable to accept such an idea. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to pay her back, insisted. The girl then abruptly started removing the glove from her hand. She then advised to take her trinket if that was the case. In the guy's hand, the girl put a stunning ring. Was hesitant because the ring appeared to be very costly. However, she gave him a wink and reminded him that discussing price is rude. Then grinned at his friend while clenching the ring in his fist. Sadly, though, it was time to part ways. They weren't saying goodbye indefinitely. All they said was "see you." And the bishop were in the king's chambers at the same moment. Introduced himself while kneeling in front of the king. The king asked him to look at him after he said his name. According to legend, the demon king has unrivaled power, according to king. Thus, the king wanted to know if had a group to fight the demon king. When heard that question, he became anxious. However, he made the firm declaration that he does have such a team without giving it much thought. Was already pacing the street after a while. Given how challenging the conversation with the king had been, he was attempting to unwind. The happy suddenly showed up and inquired about how everything had gone. Declared that he had located a cheap inn without waiting for a response. He also mentioned that he would spend a few days away from the capital. Was cautioned by that heroes would not be permitted entry until he arrived. Acknowledged everything and pledged to complete everything as soon as possible. The young people then went their separate ways. Was already considering her options the following day. He was going to a gun store, but he didn't know why there were so many of them. Something abruptly began taking place behind his back at that precise moment. It turned out that a couple of guys were thrown out of his shop by an irate weapon shop owner. He yelled at them to leave and threatened to beat them if he saw them again. He also said he would not sell them anything. Was obviously interested in such a man. He made the decision to walk over to the store and take a look, then made the decision to go inside, but before he could blink, he noticed a hammer flying in his direction. Thankfully, responded appropriately, and the hammer struck the door rather than him. Consequently, the door developed a massive hole. The seller who had earlier thrown out the other customers noticed as he peered through the hole into the shop. The man was courteous with. He came over and inquired about his health and whether he was hurt. After examining, the seller asserted that there would have been issues if the hammer had struck him because it was fairly heavy. Questioned the man about why it had occurred. Some amateur idiot who had never hunted wanted to buy a weapon that did not suit his level, the man angrily claimed. The vendor claimed that the idea of those fools using his weapons infuriated him. However, did not hesitate to inform him that such treatment of customers is still unacceptable. After agreeing, the man merely inquired as to what wished to purchase. The man answered that he had to buy a sword for a friend first. Why for a friend and not for myself? The man asked himself. However, he went in search of something appropriate without waiting for a response. His eyes suddenly landed on a sword that was nearby. Realized that they had recently gained a lot of popularity and that it was a holy sword. However, he didn't really need that sword. Thus, he made the decision to simply look more closely. Suddenly recognized how old this spear was. The man came back then and expressed regret for the wait. He brought a one-handed sword for to use, made the snap decision to accept the offered sword. The man went on to inquire as to whether himself required a weapon. All weapons are expensive, he retorted. The man then requested that he examine something. He presented the man with a particular spear. The spear is sturdy despite its age, the elderly man clarified. Additionally, because it is worn, the price is low. Felt an odd sensation as he held the spear. But the man didn't know why he was feeling that way. And a voice spoke in his mind as he twirled the spear slightly. I was awakened by you. Initially believed the elderly man had spoken and inquired about it. The man, however, maintained that he had not spoken, then started to turn his head in an attempt to figure out who was talking to him. The voice spoke once more at that precise moment. What a fool, I'm being held by you now. Then glanced at his spear and started speculating. Once more the voice spoke. Indeed, this one is long, thick, and robust, and that's all I have to say. My name is, I am the world's rarest weapon. It's good to meet you, master, the spear uttered. Was taken aback by this sudden development. After a while, was already using his new spear while sitting close to the inn. Since they were at the least expensive inn, was obviously offended. However, maintained that having a roof over one's head is more important than the cost. Was already beginning to regret taking that spear because was bothering him all the time. Since her owners were usually shocked, refused to calm down and asked why he was so composed. Merely stated that if it weren't for his voice, he would already be asleep. Became aware that his voice had changed and that it had sounded different in the old man's shop. It doesn't depend on her, said, but added that she had used telepathy to communicate with the man there. Repeated the action, claiming that this would allow her to divulge secrets to the man. Was taken aback upon hearing this. As usual, started talking to the man again. She clarified that this is how she finds it more convenient. All asked was that refrain from speaking to him in public. Found it amusing that he would talk to himself. However, made the decision to only speak to in the capital. Gladly accepted suggestion that she move on. Finally, made the decision to partake in the most fascinating activity. Also made the decision to find out's destination. She also wanted to know if he had a biological sister. Replied to that he didn't have a sister while holding the ring that his new friend had given him. Made the snap decision that he had to go see women with easy virtue. Merely advised him to exercise greater caution in that regard. Eventually arrived at the location he required. A half-dressed woman welcomed him and first thanked him for coming. Without hesitation said he had to grow up. The girl was quite taken aback by the abrupt statement. Was attempting to soothe at the time so he wouldn't be concerned. Abruptly, a second girl came in and called out to the girl working the counter. She asked the girl working at the counter to tidy the room with grace. She did a great job and promised to take care of it. Asked if she worked here after noticing the gorgeous girl who had just left. That girl is a free, retorted. Then hurried after the stranger without giving it any thought. Tried to stop him and inquire as to what was happening but had lost interest. At last he located her. As he caught up, he stopped the girl and asked her to be his first. Hearing such a request surprised her a little. She clarified by asking if he wanted to purchase her as an easy-to-behave woman. Complimented her and said, "I want that," without hesitation. He wants to become a man because of her. The girl thanked him for the compliment but cautioned that it wouldn't be free. Not only is it not free, but it is also not inexpensive. Then made the decision to inquire about the cost of hiring such a stunning woman. His eyes almost popped out when she whispered the price in his ear. The cost was excessively high. At the end, there were 3 zeros. However, had no intention of giving up. He was adamant that he would make that money. Gave the girl his name and said she just needed to wait for him to buy her. The girl then assured him that she would wait for him. Eventually arrived at the Mercenaries Guild. Even a contract had been signed by him. Was struck by the boy's resolve, just thought he had to move quickly. Then inquired as to how intended to generate so much revenue. After all, he wouldn't be able to make that much money until he was promoted. Ultimately chose to begin with basic rat hunting. Even hunting monsters excited, despite attempts to explain that it would be difficult. After a while, was already cutting open one of the rat's bellies. It was necessary to deliver the meat to the guild. It turned out that because rats are pests, they are eradicated daily in agriculture. Made the hasty decision to acquire 10 more carcasses. After a few minutes, came across another rat and swiftly used his spear to kill it. He had already killed 3 rats. He was asked if he enjoyed working with his new partner was happy that they could make more money and kill even more rats. However, maintained that his current possessions would suffice and that he had no desire to become a mercenary. That infuriated, who labeled as lazy. He wasn't lazy at all, insisted. In order to avoid upsetting him, said that he had potential and that she would teach him how to use her. Confused, inquired as to whether intended to teach him spear mastery. He was entirely correct, she replied. She gave the same response when asked again. Then, his expression dissatisfied, he inquired as to how long this would go on. Told him to stop talking and clarified that she meant abilities. The individuals who had wielded her were professionals but insisted she wasn't boasting. She therefore desired to impart all knowledge to. Did he just have to repeat after her? Asked. Responded that he would have to take her with him in order for them to synchronize and for him to start learning. Clarified that while could fight at any range if he became a professional, the advantage of a spear is its ability to attack from a distance. The best balance, she explained, is to hold the spear about 2/3 of the way from the end because it gives you enough power without overtaxing your muscles. It becomes easier to control if one holds it in the center. Although it will be less successful, this tactic can also be applied in close quarters. The spear can be used at a greater range if it is held close to the base. Although the attack power increases, it becomes more difficult to control and puts more strain on the muscles. Asked him to keep these basic guidelines in mind. Acknowledged that he was taken aback and had not anticipated this. Had faith in him and believed that if he understood the fundamentals, he would succeed. To reaffirm everything, she then recommended going hunting once more. Gladly consented. After a while, handled rats with ease. He was taken aback by how much less exhausted he felt. It happened because he had started to move less, explained. She thought his results were pretty good. Killed 27 animals in all. The boy ultimately concluded that it was sufficient for today. Was searching the sanctuary at the moment for the holy sword he was meant to retrieve. He met a certain girl while searching, and she advised him to move quickly because monsters don't wait. This girl continued to follow, and it turned out that knew her, Lady was her name, had also met the same girl, announced that she would now accompany the boys on their trip. Was a little concerned about this, but reassured him that he should take care of himself because she was well trained. Reflected as he left that he had once assumed that because was a princess, she would accompany them. She was as strong and noble too as he was. After wandering through the sanctuary for some time, finally found the holy sword. When he saw it, he went over and picked it up. Then raised the sword without thinking. The sword spoke at that precise moment. I am the holy sword, hero, you've come for me. And were still meandering through the forest at that point. Thought what they were doing was a little odd at one point. Gazing at the rats he had dispatched, questioned if gourmets also behaved in this manner. After gathering all the dead rats into his sack, thanked for helping him earn much more quickly, abruptly sensing danger, alerted. She was also correct, wolves jumped at him from the bushes. However, responded effectively and was able to defend himself in time, using his spear to ward off the wolves thanks to. The wolves died after a while, even thought he had a death odor. He asked what he should do next after deciding that was sufficient. Recommended they visit the guild. Did they need more? Asked. In response, said she had no idea. Unable to hear her clearly, repeated her question. Became agitated and complained that he was already bothering her before recommending that they visit the guild. Eventually appeared at the front desk to turn over his treasure. The girl who accepted it called him a rat slayer and complimented him on his outstanding work. However, felt that nickname was embarrassing and not cool at all. The girl insisted that he was helping a lot of people and that it was a cool nickname, made the hasty decision to tell her that he had to leave. The girl acknowledged this and promised to write him a recommendation letter as well. After thanking her, made her way out. However, he ran into a girl with a big chest before he could leave the guild. He remarked aloud how big her chest was because was staring at him so intently, cried out in his head that he was a fool at that precise moment. His remarks greatly offended the girl whose chest he had just made a remark about. After waking up, apologized while scratching the back of his head. The girl referred to him as a rat slayer and asked him if he was proud of that. Her attempt to make fun of him infuriated, who wanted to reply. However, told him to stop talking since the girl was stronger than him. After listening, made the decision to go. However, the girl persisted in pressuring him, claiming that she believed he was more courageous. After making sure no one could hear, moved aside and asked what was happening. That fox's weapon is a katana, retorted. He inquired because had no idea what a katana was. In a nutshell, described a katana as an extremely delicate sword. His apparent knowledge of everything irritated a little, so he inquired as to how much that katana cost. Responded, of course it was. Pictured his sweetheart approaching him while dressed as a nurse. Inquired as to whether he was content knowing what was going through his mind. Said shyly that everything was all right. As got closer, he noticed his princess standing next to a man who was holding her hands. Decided to step in after realizing right away that something was amiss. As he approached, he used his spear to strike the thug who was bothering the girl, and then he greeted, who was stunned. After a short while, tea was being served by. Clarified that the fool from before had been pursuing her lately. Just then, she saw blood on his clothing. She assumed it was her fault right away, but clarified that he had most likely sustained that injury in the forest. Without hesitation, used magic to heal his wound. Expressed regret and pledged to pay her back. However, she maintained that she was just repaying a favor. Realized then that is not your typical person. Few are able to use such high-level healing magic. Although was in awe of her skills, she did not comprehend why she worked as an easy-to-get-along woman. became aware that he was not paying attention at that point. Taking a sip of tea, clarified that he had been contemplating. Then made the decision that they needed to learn more about one another. So she proposed going out on a date. Observed that the imperial capital had a lot of stores while strolling through the city went on to say that a parade had just taken place. Questioned whether the parade had been held in honor after hearing this. Considered exploring the capital after that, but he momentarily recalled another girl, took his hand at that precise moment. She inquired irritably if he was considering other girls. When's chest touched his, she was startled and ashamed. As he considered her chest, he also thought of the fox girl he had previously met. Once more said he was considering another girl, was taken aback and baffled as to how she knew. Feeling uncomfortable, he attempted to clarify. Questioned if he was referring to Jin, thought it was pretty cool when he realized that was the fox girl's name. According to it was her second name. She clarified that it is a title because did not understand what she was saying. It becomes a person's name and represents their qualities and character. Was disappointed to learn that his second name would only be Rat Slayer. It sounded more like a moniker, which infuriated him. When heard his grievances, she did not comprehend, so chose to shift the subject. After concluding that everything was all right, took his hand and pressed her chest against him. Kept rubbing against him, which made her feel very ashamed. However, chose to proceed as a form of discipline for considering another girl after realizing how ashamed he was. Eventually called out too, he had asked her to keep quiet during the date, so he was not happy. However, maintained that she would have kept quiet if hadn't been confronted by someone who was furious with him. Inquired, what did he do? Said she didn't know, but it seemed that person didn't like going for walks with. When attempted to inquire as to why had stopped, he told her to keep quiet. A spear went through the stubborn idiot's head shortly after. Was unforgiving, since that type had even ruined their date, was a little taken aback. She realized that it was all because she was employed in that field and that type would not have approached her otherwise. However, she needed to make a living. It's obvious that didn't want her to say that about herself. He put his finger to her lips and explained that he has a specific objective and works hard to achieve it. He views her line of work as honorable and has the potential to become the norm. He really believed that, insisted. His eyes filled with tears and she wanted to give him a hug. Thinking back on those happy times, saw how adorable had appeared with him at the time. Had expressed regret too for the inconvenience and requested that he put up with it a bit longer. She acknowledged and expressed regret for acting like a rude girl, however, disagreed, so he supported. Looking at his hands, recalled those moments and discovered that a woman's skin is incredibly pleasant to the touch. Was a real pervert, so was actually relieved that she couldn't read minds. However, considered it without feeling embarrassed and thought it had nothing to do with. Saw him at that precise moment as was strolling down the street. It dawned on him that had not attended the parade when he recognized her, even considered the possibility that was just indifferent to him. Also saw the spear on his back as he was leaving. Spear piqued the interest of his holy sword as well. However, questioned what was wrong because it reacted too strongly. The sword maintained that it had only dreamed it up. Just then a carriage pulled up for. He was told that his carriage was ready by the coachman as he emerged. Meanwhile, was once more exploring the forest in pursuit of rats. He should stop clowning around and calm down, said. Maintained that he was completely composed. He was still told to stop talking by. Was shocked to learn that the forest was completely rat-free. Was even more uncomfortable because he was silent. The situation also seemed odd too, but it was because of the deathly silence that pervaded the forest, not because there were no rats. There were no indications of life, according to, asked what she thought, thinking it was the quiet before the storm. It could happen, said, and if it did, they were in big trouble. Just then, a wolf materialized behind. Before the wolf could jump at him, he acted quickly and thrust his spear. Was relieved that at least one person was remaining loyal to who they were. There were no rats, so even cheap meat worked for him. Merely advised him not to give up. Then warned that someone was coming. He became alert instantly. However, was taken aback when the newcomer came out. The same fox girl from the guild whose chest had gazed at rescued him from an unexpected attack by another wolf. Her greeting was first action. She was prepared to draw her katana already. She asked him what he had just said, not wanting a greeting but wanting to express gratitude, acknowledged the hint and expressed regret. The fox started talking rudely, obviously not going to back down. I noticed that the pitiful rat catcher has turned into a dog catcher. That surprised, who responded clumsily that he had not changed into anything. She then questioned why he was harassing the helpless. Asked to refrain from saying anything pointless. Replied that he had a name and that it was only a quest. However, it was obvious that the fox was not interested in learning the name of a pitiful rat catcher. Became aware that she was attempting to agitate him. Then he inquired as to how he ought to address her. The rat catcher could call her anything he wanted, she retorted, then inquired as to why a second-rank adventurer would be in such a location. The fox clarified that this forest was ideal for her because she was only searching for a place with weak monsters. Realized it was just another insult intended to annoy him. The fox then attempted to push him even harder. She inquired as to whether he believed he was drawing needless attention with such a horrible spear. This time lost his temper rather than, calmly remarked that the spear felt like family to him despite its angry protests. The fox went on to say that he was not well liked in the guild and was even referred to as a pitiful spearman. Was annoyed, but he made an effort to hide it and answered nicely. She asked him how he felt about the guild's perception of him as he started to leave, pondered for a while scratching his head. Then said apathetically that he just didn't give a damn. She merely referred to him as a fool, but it seemed to enrage the fox. She eventually departed, warning him not to stay in the forest. Watched her leave, unsure of her condition. The fox was probably a martial artist, said. He asked her to explain since was unsure of what that meant. Martial artists, according to, train their bodies in anticipation of future conflict, in contrast to adventurers who use weapons for financial gain. Recognized that the fox was the exact opposite of him. However, claimed that they did have one thing in common: she also had a sharp tongue. Concurred, he felt uneasy after talking to her. Was irritated by this agreement, so he told her to shut up, referred to him as impolite. Ultimately made the decision to keep looking, however felt that they ought to end it, questioned why. Noted that they were wasting time and had not discovered a single rat. Returning early would be preferable, agreed with a heavy sigh. But soon after was astounded by the sheer number of wolves that had materialized. He stood up and asked which wolf would come next, led him swiftly, 2 were to the right, 1 behind, started to regret staying in the forest. He should regret it later and concentrate on the battle, advised, found it impossible to concentrate in that circumstance. One wolf suddenly bit another, and were both taken aback, yelled that it couldn't be done but told her to keep quiet. The wolves eventually made the decision to take a quick nap. "How many wolves are left?" he asked. In response, she said that although she couldn't say for sure, a stampede had started. Since didn't comprehend, she clarified that there were numerous monsters congregating in one area and that they constituted a significant danger. Made a joke about a wolf squatting and demanding his clothes and spear after hearing about the danger. Wolves were eating whatever they could find, explained bluntly. The scarcity of food was the cause. The weak were being eaten by the strong. Food had once been enough for everyone, even though it was natural. They were more ferocious because, according to, those who ought to have perished from starvation were still alive, couldn't defeat them. Realized then that he had been near a wolf but had not been attacked. It had discovered a more appetizing target, explained, would have been devoured if it weren't for another wolf. Made the decision to continue running. He first questioned about whether he was at fault. Disagreed, this could not be caused by one person. She thought there might be a demon. At that moment there was a thunderous roar that shook the bushes and caused to perspire. Advised to run first and inquire later, even though he did not understand the demon, however, decelerated. He saw a flash and recalled the fox. Became nervous and claimed that the stampede must have been started by the fox. She pleaded with to just trust her and not to assist her, however, it was too late. turned to see a horrifying scene. The fox faced an army of wolves under the command of an odd one who wasn't like the others. It was first presented by That's Cobalt, the Dog King, a mutation that was monstrously powerful and several times larger. He is referred to as king for this reason. The stampede is due to him. Claimed they were fortunate because their scent diverted attention while watched from a hiding place in the bushes. She advised him to keep his identity a secret. Cobalt moved closer to the fox, prepared to strike. The fox pulled out her katana and struck first, quickly slicing Cobalt's abdomen. And were both shocked. She was described as perfect by, she clarified, is the art of instant defeat, making it impossible for quick observers to notice the draw. However, continued, the fox made a serious error, kept observing. The fox was getting ready to attack again. Cobalt let out a roar, clarified the error, saying that she had permitted adversaries to follow her. Behind the fox, wolves emerged, poised to strike. Couldn't comprehend how they were able to move so quickly. Cobalt had ordered them, said. Their fear was subdued by his will. If they considered Cobalt to be their father, inquired, retorted that they regarded him as king. Even could see that the fox was worn out, even though she managed to repel the wolves behind her. She continued to struggle. Cobalt once cut her leg, knocking her to her knees. Comprehended he needed to take action. Despite cautions, he hurried to assist. He noticed the fox sitting motionless on the ground as Cobalt prepared to hit it once more. Jumped directly at Cobalt, refusing to allow the monster to touch her. Called it a stupid mutt, attracted its attention, and launched an aerial attack while yelling that he had a small gift for it. Initially intended to strike the Cobalt precisely in the thigh to attack it. Discovered after striking that the Cobalt's skin was similar to that of iron. The Cobalt swung and was poised to strike him while he was considering it, but reacted and leaped back. Must prevent the Cobalt from touching him, according to. Was adept at dodging the Cobalt's blows as he continued to attack. Since was the one who assisted him in battling the wolves, felt compelled to express her gratitude to him in between attacks, but was only intrigued by their scheme. Naturally had no plan at all, which infuriated. The Cobalt was now poised to strike the boy once more, started to back off, terrified. Advised him to handle the Cobalt right away because failing to do so would not be good for them. Was advised by to collect his thoughts and complete the Cobalt. Then hurried at the Cobalt once more without giving it much thought, and delivered a blow after slightly outwitting him. However, the blow was too feeble, was just too boring for the Cobalt's skin, realized, and just thought it was funny that said such things. Had already started to believe that he was just not strong enough to handle the Cobalt. Alerted the boy to the danger facing the fox Jin at that precise moment. She had been attacked by a group of wolves. However, because the Cobalt was still attacking him, was clueless about how to assist the girl. Then suggested that the boy stab the Cobalt in the left eye, did just that. Luckily, he struck. The Cobalt pulled back and seized his injured eye. At that moment, hurried to Jin's aid. He shielded the girl from the wolves by covering her with his back. Made the decision to inquire about the fox's health while battling the wolves. It was only then that Jin recognized her savior. Such a turn greatly surprised the girl. Stated that they had already used up all of the Cobalt at that point and that he was unable to command the other wolves. However, was unexpectedly caught in danger and was unable to alert him. Additionally, fell and lost consciousness for a few minutes after the Cobalt hit him. When he awoke, he was shocked that he had managed to survive in such a circumstance at all. Ultimately, came to the disheartening realization that he had made mistakes. Jin was sitting close at the time. Why had the boy come, she asked. Stood up a little and replied that he had come to save her. Jin called a fool because she was both scared and embarrassed. I didn't ask him for help, the girl said. She recognized his desire for the best, but his current state was dire. However, who had already stood up thought that complaining would not solve the problem. He acknowledges that the circumstances are not ideal, but the boy was not going to perish at the hands of the Cobalt. Jin then furiously questioned about why he required all of this. He could have easily fled and nobody would have condemned him for it. Jin also realized that he wouldn't give a damn if someone had condemned him. Jin received no response to these remarks. However, he believed that if he doesn't think something is right, he doesn't do it to please other people. The boy selected the spear for this reason, became an adventurer, and assisted the girl in the alley. This time was no different. The boy wants to keep Jin safe at all costs, after all. At that point, Jin kept saying that she had done a lot of wrong to the boy because she didn't understand why he was now supporting her. Then made the decision to say it again. He clarified to Jin that he doesn't give a damn about what other people think, say, or judge, just wants to keep the girl safe. First and foremost, did what he wanted to do and doesn't care what other people think. According to the boy, Jin is first and foremost a woman who has found herself in a grave danger. As a result, he still does, and will take whatever action he deems necessary. Jin was shocked to hear such a speech, merely asked the girl to trust him and not worry about the wounds. There was an odd laugh at that precise moment. Then there was a voice, was unsure if he was the only one who heard this voice. How long have I waited for a perfect partner like you? Recognized voice at that moment. Went on to discuss spirit and desire in an odd voice. She asserted that she recognizes the boy. Noticed that the pain had subsided as she glanced at his previously scratched shoulder. Insisted that she would be the boy's devoted weapon from this point on, so she asked to be given a name and referred to as a hero. Then gave her a name without giving it much thought. The boy then got ready to draw the spear and attack the wolves, who were already getting close. Pulled out the spear and loudly reiterated that it would be named. The boy then threw the spear back after striking a wolf with it. Then announced that the contract was finalized and that was now considered a hero. For dominance, for justice, and for greed. The spear darkened at that point and reiterated that her name is and that the hero spearman is her master. His hand also developed an odd mark at that precise moment. Everything came to an end eventually, only advised to avoid going overboard. At that moment, understood that was the reason he was in such excruciating pain. Acknowledged it, but she clarified that it was because the master lacked the requisite skills. Nothing that said made sense to. She then made the decision to tell the boy everything. According to, she is skilled in mass control. She is currently split into two sections within his body. One component becomes tangible while the other reduces pain perception. Additionally, the contract caused the boy's body to exceed all restrictions. In other words, received strength that is many times greater than usual. More specifically, this monster is 3 times weaker than at the moment. Generally speaking, the boy is in pain because of this. Didn't fully comprehend everything until after all of these explanations. What would happen, though, if he added a bit more strength? Clarified that under such circumstances, the body would barely be able to tolerate the pressure applied. Was a little offended by these remarks, but he wanted to teach the cobalt to fly because he was so strong, was all for it. The cobalt suddenly rushed at the boy once more. Added that it would be easy to defeat him because the cobalt was worn out. Disagreed, arguing that everything is straightforward in words. However, when the boy attempted to attack the cobalt, he was still able to cut one of his paws. The cobalt, however, did not back down. He used his second paw to swing at. This time was able to both cut off and wound the paw. This made the boy happy and a smile spread across his face. Asked the boy not to unwind while was taking a little nap and the cobalt was healing from its wounds. Understanding, turned to face Jin, who was observing him. The girl's attention on him pleased the boy. He concluded that he had no right to make a mistake in that situation. Asked the boy to finally remember something at that very moment. According to her, speed is the most crucial factor in this situation. Additionally, the accuracy of the strikes. The cobalt suddenly realized what was happening and attempted to attack once more. Hurried into the attack without hesitation either. The boy was able to ram the cobalt's chest with his spear. The cobalt was forced to fall to the ground after receiving such a blow. Following such a victory, inquired about his health. Despite his poor health, the boy would undoubtedly survive. In that instance, suggested that take a nap since a support group had just arrived. As usual, the Guardians of Justice arrived late but proposed that if the group commander was killed, this would not occur. Was also part of the support group. He located and inquired as to his purpose for being here. Was happy to see as well. However, he took his time responding to him and instead looked at Jin, whose injuries were currently being attended to. The girl was shocked when the boy approached her. However, collapsed directly in front of Jin and passed out before he could get to her. Jin wanted to run to call for assistance right away, but stopped her. She was already using telepathy to communicate with Jin rather than. Jin started to scan the area for the voice's origin. At the time stated that while she can appreciate Jin's bewilderment, she must pay attention to if she wishes to assist her. Informed Jin that after receiving first aid, she had to take him to the city doctor. Jin was informed by that only could properly assist. Jin realized everything and was about to run to the others to call for assistance, but stopped her once more. Additionally, she requested that Jin bring the spear with her, saying that would greatly benefit from it. People don't expect anything from, and he wasn't meant for any particular destiny. He was just fortunate to have been born in the same city as the world's future savior. But ultimately, people will realize that they were waiting for the wrong hero. This is not the tale of the world's savior who must vanquish the demon king. The protagonist of this tale is a straightforward hard worker who nevertheless proves to be a real hero. According to, being a prostitute is the worst thing a girl can do. She has the dirtiest body on the planet, and her demise will undoubtedly not be pleasant either. In order to convince herself that she was still leading a normal life, started working as a doctor during the day because she secretly harbored regret. However, informed her that prostitution is a lucrative occupation. The girl then became aware that her thoughts had been solely focused on herself. Additionally, prostitutes occasionally assist others. She was acting like a girl in love and knew it. However, because she has very little relationship experience, she did not know what to do. Was able to communicate with, but she said something that now makes it impossible to act as though nothing had happened. She informed the boy that if she and shared a bed for free, she would feel uncomfortable in front of her paying clients. Hoped that something would occur that would allow her to retract those remarks. However, the girl realized that things don't always go as planned. Just as was lost in her thoughts, wandering around the infirmary, a carriage approached the windows. When he saw, a nervous Jin leaped out of it and inquired as to whether this was the infirmary of Doctor. Stunned by the unexpected visit, simply responded that her name is actually. Jin then started pleading with the girl to save a boy. Calm, asked Jin to remain composed until she saw the patient. Was unconscious on the stretcher. Then hurriedly instructed them to carefully place the boy on the couch first. The girl then started looking around. She discovered that the boy's internal organs, muscles, and bones had been harmed during the procedure. Then wondered why had been brought to her in particular. After all, the city has bigger, better-equipped infirmaries. In addition, asserted that they could have asked the royal soldiers to take them to a military hospital. Jin yelled at then, asking if she wanted to leave this boy to the whims of fate. Insisted repeatedly that she was just stating the facts and that could still be sent elsewhere. In actuality, though, was just terrified. The girl was unable to acknowledge it. All she said was that they ought to go to a hospital with better facilities. Thoughts of letting die plagued, even believed at that point that her partner had just picked the wrong girl. Prostitutes still readily sell themselves and betray men, she said out loud. Yelled that she didn't understand anything when she heard these words. Then yelled that she particularly did not comprehend a coward who would abandon someone to perish. Then inquired as to his desire to save him. Preserve. Responded to that by crying and saying that she wanted to save the boy. At that moment, became aware of how much more terrified she was of losing. I'm more terrified of losing him than of using this and making him angry. Realized that her eyes had been opened even though she had no idea who she was talking to. Meanwhile, claimed that her partner would only be content to pass away in the presence of someone so beautiful. Also felt that since had offended her, she needed to apologize. However, asserted that there was nothing awful about that, thanking the stranger for reprimanding her because had done so for no personal gain, then spoke to everyone in the hospital. On her honor, she vowed to save no matter what, made the decision to employ any technique. Following those remarks, thanked once more and gave her praise because had made the decision to take a significant action. Realized that she had make a very tough decision. As carried on speaking with, the girl became aware that even though she had asked everyone to leave, she could still hear this voice. She ultimately decided to start treating because she didn't think any of it mattered. Healing magic heals wounds by momentarily triggering the body's restorative processes. This implies that the injured person's physical strength is also depleted, in addition to the healer's magical power, and the weariness increases with the severity of the wounds. Thus realized that if used healing magic, he would be exhausted. The girl then made the decision that, should lack sufficient strength of his own, she would provide him with external strength. Started the therapy with this idea. The girl felt pain and grabbed her head, and in a matter of seconds, his head developed horns. The girl then bent over and put her fingers to his lips. The girl used transfer, kissing on the lips, because she was determined to save the boy at all costs. Eventually woke up after a while, he realized right away that he was in an infirmary. The boy then assumed it was just a burn after examining his hand. Was thrilled to see that her partner had woken up at that precise moment. His head ached from everything that had happened, so asked him not to yell like that. Realized then that the boy had just not woken up completely. Asked, "Who are you?" as she stared at the spear, having no idea what was happening. Responded that she was his trustworthy companion and a formidable spear when she was at her strongest. However, asserted that his spear appeared older and more worn. These words infuriated. She questioned angrily about who he had just referred to as broken, low-quality garbage. Now realized without a doubt that was speaking to him. Suddenly remembered everything that had transpired during the fight with the kobold as she looked at the mark on his hand. Became aware of his total nudity at that same moment. The boy was then instructed to look to the right by, noticed a sort of mound beneath the blanket. When she looked to the right, the boy started to remove the blanket in an attempt to discover what it was. It turned out that the mound was a woman's breast. Realized this and was taken aback. The boy's eyes were almost protruding. Satisfied, turned away and kept thinking about the breast. For the boy, even two of these areolas seemed like pure bliss. After hearing all of his offensive remarks, questioned whether the boy had become so shocked that he had begun speaking in such a manner. Suddenly perceived that his nudity was a sign of his increased maturity, however, rushed to let him down. It dawned on that he had done nothing with, however, he was unsure if that was a good or bad thing. Then asked the boy to at least express gratitude because he had been on the verge of death and would have perished if hadn't saved him. And since the girl had been nursing him for 3 full days, asked the boy not to touch her at that moment when had already turned to wake the sleeping. Genuinely made the decision not to wake after hearing that. He felt much better, so he clenched his hand into a fist and got out of bed. Requested that the boy put on his clothes first. The sight of a nude man did not appeal to her. Started getting dressed because he did not want to look at any nude men. Who had been sleeping, opened her eyes at that precise moment. When she called out to, he wished the girl a good morning as he was getting dressed. Jumped out of bed and rushed to embrace. The girl was overjoyed to have saved. Although could see that was crying and shaking, he was unsure of what to do. Suggested to the boy that you should just give a hug when things like this happen. However, just stood there and stalled even after saying that. At last, he gave a hug and expressed regret for causing the girl any anxiety. However, the fact that was pressing her bare chest against him actually caused more anxiety. The boy's awakening was the most important thing, said, giving him a hug. In addition, mentioned that had assisted her in realizing something. Recognized the significance of to her. Said she had to fuss over a virgin of some sort because she was regarded as the best courtesan in the whole capital. Didn't respond to what the girl had said. He merely gave her a modestly embarrassed glance. Assumed his horns were the reason she was staring at her that way. Without hesitation, she asked the boy if they were awful. Responded that the girl's horns weren't at all awful. Also mentioned that the girl's chest was even more powerful. Then asked once more if he really didn't find her horns unsettling. Responded once more that the girl's horns might initially appear startling rather than eerie. According to, was a stunning girl whose appearance was not at all detracted by her simple horns. That's when rushed in, she informed that the boy's response would have been the worst in a different circumstance. Was alarmed by those words. He truly didn't want to start a fight at this time. However, asserted that had already created a great deal of trouble. The boy then declared that he was no longer able to do this. However, attempted to explain to the boy that such a result would have occurred in a different circumstance. Insisted that he could no longer put up with it. At that point, suddenly started to approach. His eyes were confused and the girl's were filled with tears. Without giving it much thought, pressed her lips to the boy's. Additionally, the girl kissed on the lips despite his request that she stop. Called out to the girl who was putting her finger to his lips once more as requested that the boy just refer to her as. The girl stated that she wanted to refer to her as lady because had previously called her that. Confessed after saying these words, she had a deep affection for him. The girl then gave another kiss without waiting for a response, and he asked himself in a state of shock, what did she just say? After a while they were already sharing a cup of tea, felt compelled to express regret too. The girl felt that she had displayed herself in a very deplorable manner. Scratching the back of his head, acknowledged that he was taken aback by the girl's statement but also expressed gratitude for the admission. The girl asked the boy if he was bothered by her horns. Responded that in his opinion, horns were equivalent to ears or tail. According to, he was not particularly bothered by it. Then asked the boy to listen to her after hearing what he had to say. According to the girl, she was probably a succubus. Since was ignorant of that, he inquired about specifics. According to, a succubus is a demoness who entices men, weakens them, and ultimately kills them. When heard the word demoness, she thought of fairy tales, however, asserted that she was unsure because she had never encountered her own kind. Nevertheless, the girl discovered that her power was comparable to that of a succubus. Was taken aback and asked if she meant what he believed her to mean. Responded that she meant the capacity to deplete one's energy. The girl was certain that had questioned why was a courtesan in addition to being a healer. The problem is that succubi cannot survive if they do not feed on the strength of others. Was no different, and having sex is the quickest way to become stronger. At that moment, realized everything. He considered it fortunate that no one was aware of his identity. Additionally, the boy saw that was reluctant to discuss it. To be able to take spiritual strength, retorted, one must be able to sense it accurately and to a certain degree freely control its level. Strength draining is not an automatic process. It takes a definite will to do it. Discovered that this skill operated on the same principle as healing magic, which she employed more for fun than for actual healing. Following that, the girl conducted research, expanded her understanding of healing magic, and eventually became the city doctor. Consequently created magic that had the opposite effect of depleting strength. We refer to this magic as strength transfermania. This was dubbed magic transfer by, only succubi or those close to them can master it, the girl asserted. Informed that she transferred life force to him, because of the serious injury, he would not have been able to withstand normal healing magic. Additionally, only with these horns was able to use transfer. The girl also mentioned that she can better control life force if she touches someone's skin to skin. She was unable to conceal her horns because of this. This whole story came as a shock too. He wanted to thank once more for saving him because he could not even fathom how miserable he had been. Survival also made very happy. Had another query. The boy, a little embarrassed, inquired as to whether a woman had made that confession to a man. The girl lowered her head in embarrassment at this question. Her face was distinctly flushed. She then inquired as to whether the boy had found it unpleasant. His assumption by shaking his head from side to side. Since it was the first time he had heard a girl make a confession, clarified that he had simply been a little taken aback. Despite having stated that he wanted the girl to be his first, the boy acknowledged that he had not anticipated a declaration of love from her. Approached the boy and with his face against her chest claimed that she loved him uncontrollably because he accepted her as a succubus and a prostitute. According to, he was the most amazing man she had ever met. Was initially perplexed by those words and the chest directly in front of his face, but the boy eventually calmed down and closed his eyes. Then and said he could relate to the girl's emotions, despite not having any doubts about, chose to inquire as to whether he had resolved his own emotions. Retorted that he would undoubtedly select love if given the choice between the two options. However, the boy also acknowledged that he wasn't certain it was a man's love for a woman, then implied that she had rushed as well, indicating that she obviously needed to calm down. However, the girl also mentioned that if he even slightly acknowledged her feelings, could visit her tonight. As strolled through the city streets, asserted that he had handled things pretty well for someone who had never dealt with girls before. However, merely requested that stop trying to console him and shut up. claimed that if it handled everything flawlessly right now, he would have long since turned into an unstoppable womanizer. She warned the boy to exercise caution since she was aware of his propensity for doing so, maintained that he had no such inclinations, however, thought the boy was unaware of it himself. Suddenly recalled what had said when she invited him over, the boy even thought about just putting his faith in fate. Since the boy still had time before nightfall, advised him to take a stroll and reflect for a bit. She reassured him that she would be prepared to collect his bones in the event of an emergency. Became enraged after realizing that was talking about him making a mistake. However, suggested that he go get his money and change the topic. Eventually arrived at the guild. He was going to present the Kobold King's fang to the guild. In fact, that fang had been torn out as evidence by a certain. Couldn't tell if this girl was being too serious or too principled because she could have just kept the fang for herself. According to, was the kind of person who was strict with herself and with other people, and she didn't like being so cruel. Should at least thank if he met her since it turned out that he had been extremely concerned about her. Concurred, when they first met, he even made the decision to buy the girl a present. Just then, Fox's ears glowed close by. Additionally, rushed to embrace despite attempts to alert her to the impending danger. The girl immediately started discussing how doctor had told her about the boy's condition, was overjoyed that was doing well. However, asked the girl who she was since he didn't know her. Additionally, the boy begged her to release him, then expressed her regret to him, saying that she had just been too happy to control herself, then recommended that they leave this location, inquired as to what had occurred. It turned out that had observed the odd looks they were receiving, however, asserted that everything was normal. Then burst into joy and declared that she had a request for. The girl had been calling him a hero the entire time. That did not sit well with, he just asked her not to call him that because he felt uncomfortable. Then picked up her katana and set it down. She then knelt down and asked if he would accept her as his servant. Obviously did not anticipate that, he was unable to comprehend the context in which was speaking. The two of them went to a cafe to figure it out. Eventually made the decision to introduce herself while seated at a table. She requested that just refer to her as. In that instance, also requested that she refer to him as just rather than hero or master. However, was adamant that she wanted to address him as master. Told the boy in a low voice that would have to accept the fact that Eastern masters were very unyielding. Meanwhile, wanted to tell how odd it was that he could not accept her as a servant because of his lower status. At the very least, the boy thought it odd. However, asserted that being a mercenary was merely a formality created by someone. Then inquired about it, assuming the girl was just trying to thank him for vanquishing the Kobold King. Additionally, he stated that truthful report of the monster's defeat would suffice for him. Acknowledged that although she was sincerely appreciative of the assistance, what she had witnessed behind the boy's back was more significant to her. Such words confused. Behind claimed to have seen the image of a future hero. Was initially embarrassed by that remark, but he swiftly and angrily attempted to clarify that she was overestimating him. According to, he was merely a common mercenary and a village boy who would never rise to the heights she had envisioned. However, was sure, he would have fled instead of saving her if had been a typical mercenary. Then she wouldn't be sitting in front of him right now. Described it as pure luck. Did not refute that, however, she also mentioned that was the one who was able to catch luck by the tail. Following those words, pondered and examined the mark on his hand. The voice he had heard in the forest when that mark first appeared suddenly came back to him, was selected and would now become a hero, according to the voice. Then pondered the nature of that voice, informed him then that the fox would not be persuaded. However, continued to wonder why wanted to serve him right away, suggested that give a trial period, may have acted emotionally when making the choice. She might settle down and come to a reasonable conclusion if she remained with him for a while, made the decision to take on a trial basis after listening to. And almost burst with happiness when told her that. However, added right away that he didn't like different services, but he wanted to begin on an equal footing because he knew was serious. Didn't realize he might have gone too far until after he said that. Before he could even finish explaining, who was observant, inquired as to whether he meant friends. Responded hesitantly that she was correct, but he didn't think it was quite that. Realized that you have to get to know someone well before you can make them a servant. She was aware of her bad habit of rushing all the time. Then went into further detail. He claimed that the purpose of their friendship was to determine whether or not she would serve him, was relieved that everything had been explained and at last understood. As a result, temporarily joined as a companion, future historians would write it that way. And eventually made their way to the guild. They were accompanied by odd looks even there. They said they had come for the prize as they walked up to the counter. Examining the kobold fang that had brought, the woman behind the counter said that they knew what had happened. She asked them to follow her to an office and apologized. Didn't care. In any case, she wanted to go into great detail. They were led to another room by the woman. A bald man greeted them there and initially expressed regret to and for taking so long. He gave his name. Callan was his name. He was happy to meet and had a lot of influence in the guild. It turned out knew him. She was aware that Callan was a prominent member of the guild. She claimed that they had met at work and that he occasionally gave her tasks. His words were not refuted by Callan. However, he had a question regarding the triumph over the Kobold King. According to Callan, a 5th-rank mercenary informed the guild that the death of the beast could cause a stampede in the forest. Consequently, the guild dispatched to make sure. Fortunately, was able to defeat the Kobold King despite the guild's worst fears coming to pass. The ecosystem would undoubtedly be impacted by the remaining kobolds, according to Callan, but even mercenaries ranked lower than 4th could defeat them. Thus, in the midst of misfortune, such a quick victory was fortunate. Was exhausted from all these pointless discussions. Indignantly, she inquired as to how long Callan planned to talk. Laughing and referring to as strict, Callan chose to be direct. He stated that he was curious about the identity of this accomplishment's hero, retorted that yesterday she had covered everything. To get one last clarification, Callan asked if he had vanquished the Kobold King. He had struck the last blow, retorted. Interrupted Callan, who assumed that had only delivered the final blow. She claimed that although she had engaged the kobold in combat first, she had only slightly injured him, was the one who dispatched the monster. Sudden giving of all the credit to someone else so eager for glory was unbelievable to Callan. Insisted that she was just stating the facts and not giving credit away. She claimed that for her, fame had always been a means to an end. And now she didn't think it mattered. What does that mean? Callan asked, retorted that she had just discovered a master. Callan was taken aback by those words, suggested right away that they talk about the victory again. Callan grinned but nodded. The man cleared his throat and stated that the guild had that's hand was not responsible for the wounds on the Kobold King's body. When heard that, she was astounded that the guild could ascertain even that. However, Callan clarified that merely employed a unique weapon. He claimed that the king's heart had been totally severed by the last blow. That would not have been possible but it was difficult for the guild to accept that a novice of 5th rank could cause such an injury. Questioned once more if that was the reason they had called them, she said she would not change her response. Master had finished the mission. Callan asked if was being honest. In response, said she wasn't lying. Callan decided to report it that way after giving it some thought. Herself did not protest either. Was irritated that it had taken them so long to accept her. Callan claimed that although he trusted her, his position prevented him from accepting her words at face value. He also noted that seemed to have technically tampered with her assignment. Realized then that interference could also result in consequences. Callan stated that urgent action was necessary, but as a matter of formality, he had to make all the clarifications. As listened to Callan, she suddenly realized how difficult it must be to work for a company. After a while, Callan gave a document and requested that he sign it. For Callan had one request. He wanted to receive a portion of the reward for eliminating the kobold. Loudly protested upon hearing this. However, was certain that he would have perished there by himself. He acknowledged that he had initially been reluctant to take part in that altercation, should therefore be regarded as one of the people who finished the mission. He requested that this be interpreted as an expression of his appreciation. Was moved by his sincere remarks. Callan had no problem granting his request, spoke at that very moment. She referred to as a reckless womanizer because she found it annoying that he kept boosting his level of trust with women. Callan made the decision to end the case. In recognition of such a triumph, he proposed elevating to 4th rank, inquired about it since she didn't fully understand. According to Callan, was well regarded by other guild employees who said he was courteous and completed assignments with diligence in contrast to other newcomers. Naturally, he would have to pass the promotion tests, but Callan thought he was deserving. It was up to decide whether or not to take them. Considered it. Ultimately made the decision not to sit for the tests. Was perplexed by his response because he had enough money to purchase, even though he was no longer in need of doing so. Just didn't get the point. Since had already arrived in and made all of the decisions, she instructed him to settle this first. Advised him not to keep such a lovely woman waiting while stood in front of his entrance, contemplating whether or not to enter. Thanked alone. Advised him to try his hardest because everything now rested on him. She intended to stay like a piece of furniture until dawn. Thought that statement was odd and nearly conclusive. However, found the bravery to knock on's door after a few minutes. Inquired who had arrived from within. It was obvious that it was him. The door then opened. The girl was nowhere to be seen when the boy entered. Thus he made the decision to examine his bedroom. He discovered the girl there, standing in the darkness. He could see the face of the grate as he drew nearer. It was obvious that the girl was pleased to see him, but first she just said hello to him. Went on to say that she had dressed especially because she wanted to know how much loved her. Felt a little self-conscious about dressing that way for him alone. He clarified that since he was just a regular village boy with no wealth or prestige, maybe he wasn't deserving of her. However, claimed that although she had previously slept with rigid men, she now desired to spend the night with in particular. She claimed that her succubus instincts yearned for him. However, also cautioned that if she followed her gut, she might just act like a prostitute. She wouldn't be able to control herself in that situation. She therefore felt compelled to inquire as to whether he would be content with spending the night with such a woman. Was a little scared now, but she knew he had already made up his mind. He was aware that he shouldn't force the girl into such a situation. Thought that since he was a man, he shouldn't remain motionless all the time. Thus, he hurried over threw her onto the bed and planted a kiss on her lips. And declared that he didn't care if was a succubus or a prostitute. He claimed that he just loved. I want every single one of you. At those words, his eyes began to well up with tears for some reason, but she returned the favor. As she listened to all of these passionate discussions, came to the realization that her partner was even a hero in bed. However, it was unsure if that was a good or bad thing. There was a specific meeting going on at the moment. Was invited to join and had to decline though, knowing that had traveled to the capital in search of a hero, was taken aback by the rejection. Clarified that she had already discovered a master to whom she would always be devoted. Who was that master? Questioned. Retorted that since had seen him, he ought to already be familiar with him. Realized she was referring to after hearing those words. Was taken aback, but he clarified that was a fellow citizen who had requested to visit the capital. Listened in disbelief. She became aware that she ought to express her gratitude for introducing her to. The fact that the girl referred to as master baffled a little, however, was confident that would also grow into a valiant hero. A while later, and were traveling in a carriage after meeting. Asked his sword in his mind to clarify the distinction between a brave hero and a savior hero. A savior hero carries the desires of all people and saves the world. Retorted. Strong ambition and individuality are the primary characteristics of a brave hero who can also save the world. According to a courageous hero will stop at nothing to accomplish his objectives, and his unwavering determination may one day spark a real revolution. Did, however, add that a savior and a courageous hero had never before appeared in the same time period. She claimed that had let her down by pledging allegiance to the impolite villager. Found these words amusing. Seated across from held the pendant that had given her, then inquired as to whether the pendant held special meaning for her. The girl replied, grinning, that she genuinely treasured the pendant. Was horrified to see that its face now resembled. Was incredulous at what was taking place. It was becoming more and more like a legend about a valiant hero. When woke up next to the following day, she thought about how gorgeous breasts were. The boy then turned to face the girl and stated that, despite his understanding that being a prostitute was a source of life force for her, he did not want other men to sleep with her, was a little embarrassed by those remarks. She asked if he wanted to go to sleep after giving him a kiss on the lips. In response, said he didn't. According to, this kiss provided her with just as much energy as she used to get from a single male encounter. Was taken aback by that statement, came to appreciate the beauty of reciprocal love at that moment. The girl claimed that even if became her lover, she could live in peace with him alone, made the decision to stop being a prostitute as a result. She really knew how to get a man excited, said, grinning as she looked at. Then, as he got out of bed, he declared that he would attempt to advance and pass the rank promotion exam. Even though she would no longer be a prostitute, declared that she would continue to practice medicine, so she wouldn't require cash. However, maintained that a man's constant desire is to brag in front of women. First made the decision to take to the elderly man he had purchased her from, started chatting openly with the elderly man and getting to know him. The old man was stunned by such a turn of events since did not stop talking for even a second. The elderly man claimed to have a lot of experience handling weapons, but he had never encountered one that was so talkative. Additionally, he questioned about why he had brought to him. Telling the old man about her did not sit well with, she even started to think was trying to sell her. Maintained that all he wanted was to finally understand what was. Questioned what would happen if she didn't tell him, retorted that if that were the case, he would ask the elderly man to cast her into the furnace, which is why they were present. Concluded that it would be best to respond to all of his inquiries. She started off by introducing herself as a magical blade, a weapon that belonged to the courageous hero. Considered it, had mentioned a valiant hero in a similar way, he recalled. The old man went on to say that the savior hero was the one who took the initiative in this day and age. Asserted that while both heroes accomplished amazing things, they were fundamentally very different. As a result, the hero who saves others battles for their desires. Furthermore, the valiant hero is a total moron who dashes into hell to fulfill his own ambitions. Was struck by those words because they implied that he was a total moron. However, since had hurried off to battle the Kobold King, did not even contest it. Nevertheless, acknowledged that she loved foolish because it was amazing to risk one's life for a woman. Naturally, was flattered that a spear had declared its love for him. To put it briefly, was a weapon designed especially for a fool like. Furthermore, it didn't really matter that she could speak. Suggested that could use her as a confidant to confide in about his issues. Despite the fact that she truly assisted him, only saw his problems. Then questioned why wasn't in a treasure vault but rather among used goods in a partially destroyed store. Although he did not concur that the shop was destroyed, the elderly man largely agreed with the assertion. He said that the spear had been given to him by a well-known weaponsmith, but he had made no mention of. Retorted that she was really just an old piece of iron in the absence of a contract. Examined the mark on his hand and surmised what contract she meant. In reality, the mark on his hand was a stigma, clarified. The person she acknowledges as a valiant hero receives a symbol from her. She also mentioned that would be aware that the symbol had no negative effects, so he shouldn't be concerned. Conversely, it offered numerous beneficial advantages. Would soon see that for himself, according to. Following this contract, asked what he was expected to do. In response, said she had no idea. Was irritated by that response. A brave hero, continued, is one who puts his life in danger to fulfill his own ambitions. She ought to inquire as to his current desires. In response, stated that he hoped to make enough money to give a comfortable life. According to, her goal was not to mentor a very serious hero. Furthermore, weapons are generally made to be used for a purpose rather than to fulfill a mission, request, or plea. She needed someone, according to, who would first haughtily choose himself rather than say, the desire of the woman he wished to save. Specifically made a contract with for this reason. She maintained that a courageous hero is one who chooses and pursues his objective on his own, rather than one who is selected. Took the rank promotion exam a week later. The boy felt eyes on him all the time as he and the other explorers rode in a carriage. Told him to disregard it even though he knew it was due to the spear. Continued to meet the gazes of those in attendance. Had always felt like he had a lot of people watching him since the beast incident. However, claimed that a courageous hero first attracts interested onlookers around him, whether he wanted it or not. would soon witness those looks become jealous, however, didn't desire such fame. According to her role was to assist him in achieving his goals because nobody could predict what the future held and everything hinged on him. And the other explorers eventually exited the carriage and appeared before a judge who was prepared to start the examination for advancement to 4th rank. The judge clarified that eliminating kobolds was the exam's focus. Thought it odd that 4th rank applicants were given kobolds, but the judge insisted that each mercenary had to have at least 30 kills. It was also permitted for participants to form teams. Someone had to go back to the starting point and report the information to a guild worker after they had killed the necessary number. Participants were permitted to kill more than the necessary number, the judge added. The number of kobolds killed would then be used to determine the mercenary's reward. He asked since was standing there not understanding. After the last incident, assumed the guild had just decided to clean up. Additionally, 36 kobolds were promoted to 4th rank, which was a fitting promotion. The judge also instructed participants to discard the magical artifacts they were given on the ground in the event of unanticipated events. A loud explosion and a colored signal flare would result from this. A second-ranking mercenary would be in charge of the participants, would therefore arrive right away to assist if something went wrong. However, urged everyone to give it a shot so she wouldn't have to save them. His appearance did not sit well with, had just come running for him, according to. The judge went on to say that if participants used the artifact, they would fail the test, but they should not hesitate because life was more important. Additionally, they would have a unique, independent assistant today. It was the doctor. The judge stated that although was skilled at healing magic and could heal wounds, they shouldn't depend on her either. Was so taken aback by that appearance that his eyes nearly exploded, and could only think about how adorable she was as stood there waving. The judge then declared that the exam would begin. Called out to right away because she had a question, however, was the first to speak. She was aware of his astonishment and anticipated that he would inquire as to why she had asked a guild employee for permission to take the test. She clarified that she was just concerned that he might experience another incident, however, didn't think that would occur, maintained that she could not abandon a mercenary because anything could happen in his life. After all, free spirit was the reason she had fallen in love with him, and since the exam had started and everyone was staring at them, attempted to bring back to reality while they were charmingly discussing love. Also made the decision to be seen, she rushed toward and then stopped. Then, a little agitated, she reiterated that would fail if he continued to stand there because the exam had already begun. Without arguing, just left to search for kobolds. Then spoke to, who was observing her beloved depart. Stated that although she was aware of her relationship with, she should act appropriately because she was a doctor here. With a smile, responded that shouldn't disregard her role as an observer and that she fully intended to carry out her responsibilities. Was even more irritated by those words. That was precisely why she was here, she said, turning away. Looked at and suddenly recalled how the girl had stood over while he was unconscious, worried about him. Smiled for some reason when she thought of those memories. For everything was going smoothly. There was just one query. How long, according to, shouldn't unwind because the kobolds were less organized without the king, but some clever ones were still present. Instructed to slow down as he strolled freely through the forest. She clarified that a mercenary in an uncomfortable circumstance was located ahead to the left. Commended as he hurried to assist without hesitation. Was instructed by to cease speaking and report the incident. The mercenary, who was alive but motionless and probably had a leg injury, was surrounded by roughly 10 kobolds, according to, started to run even more quickly. He eventually located the mercenary, who was desperately swinging his sword wildly. The mercenary leaped at the sight of and stood back to back with the kobolds, yelling for assistance. The kobolds took advantage of the situation and got ready to attack his back. Without hesitation, threw directly into the kobolds. Flew at a high speed with a happy shout. She passed through one kobold's throat with a bullet. The kobolds, however, did not back down, got ready to wield the enchanted blade. And showed up right on schedule. Wolves were already charging at that precise moment. Was only thrilled to shine upon being called. Holding, was able to repel multiple kobolds with a single swing. Went up to the mercenary and inquired about his well-being after the threat had passed. However, the mercenary asked what had just done in response. Stood unsure of how to respond, had been summoned by him. No matter how far away she was, he could call her name and she would be in his hands in an instant. According to their contract, the magical blade had this new ability. However, was not going to tell the mercenary about that. He just instructed him to make a guess. What worried more was the man's leg. He noticed that the wound was deep and heavily bleeding. Where was the artifact? Inquired. According to the mercenary, he dropped it while running away, chose to make use of his own relic. What are you doing? The mercenary asked. Promised to make use of it. The mercenary objected, claiming that if a second rank saved him from pitiful kobolds, he would be ridiculed. Was enraged, but she kept it to herself. Sensing his condition, advised him to maintain composure and avoid making the half-dead mercenary's situation worse. Attempted to gently explain that being stubborn was not in his best interests because he would die from such a wound. However, the mercenary continued to grumble. At last, lost patience and threatened to physically silence him. Was surprised by how powerful the explosion was when he threw the artifact. Even at the edge of the forest, it would undoubtedly be audible. Just then, felt a presence coming. Then she knew she had to break the news to, had no idea what to anticipate anymore. Claimed that although she couldn't tell if anyone had been attacked, a huge object was on its way. Was perplexed. He believed that this forest was free of enormous animals. Abruptly realized how close the danger was and ordered to get ready for combat. Huge horns emerged through the bushes. A huge bull with horns wondered why the animal was there as she observed it. The bull was obviously furious based on the look in its eyes. Since bulls were thought to be calm, did not understand why, instructed him to examine its side. Then he realized the bull's side was severed. It was gushing blood, thought the bull was angry because some idiot had hurt it. However, realized that the exam was being taken by a fool, not just any fool. Examined the circumstances. The fact that there was no blood on the horns indicated that the fool who had injured the bull had quickly run away. After going crazy and racing to track down its assailant, the bull exploded, had thus entered someone else's mess. Went on to say that the horned bull would not stop until it had destroyed everything in its path because of its rage. It was so quick that no human could outrun it. Made the decision to wait for it to arrive. Reminded him of their burden, which was the wounded mercenary who had almost been ripped apart by kobolds. Pondered what would do in such a circumstance. While the bull was still accelerating, she advised abandoning the boy and sprinting too. However, despite knowing that the mercenary would not be able to sleep soundly after being saved, refused to leave him. Then realized she had been right to see as a hero, was prepared to fight, and the bull was prepared to attack. Additionally, defended both himself and the unfortunate mercenary when the bull charged directly at them. Only suggested that the mercenary shield his head. The boy then employed enchantment. Merely instructed to hit the bull that was charging at them. And the bull's horns started to break when the boy hit it. The blow caused the bull itself to begin tumbling to the ground. After a short while was sitting with and attempting to comprehend what had transpired. He never would have thought such a crazy thing would happen. Reassured him that his enchantment had gone more smoothly than it had the first time. Enchantment is, in essence, the capacity to greatly increase weight. Had also employed enchantment in the conflict with the Kobold King. Similar to summoning, enchantment is an additional benefit of the contract. Concurred that he had employed enchantment more skillfully this time. He pondered whether the contract with might have an impact. Responded that she could help the boy grow a little. However, she continued to think was just talented, unsure of what talent she meant, asked, maintained that would eventually comprehend everything on his own. For the time being, suggested that he eat a lot, sleep a lot, and move around. Chuckled and inquired as to whether believed him to be a young child. Retorted that was already present and that she was significantly older than. In fact, a nervous appeared at that precise moment. Was welcomed by who also thanked her for attending. Have they sent the signal for help? The girl asked. Retorted that although he had sent the signal, another mercenary needed assistance. After giving the mercenary a quick examination, determined that he should be brought to see doctor. In addition, she informed the mercenary that he had formally failed the test, informed her right away that it was not their fault that they had come across the horned bull. He clarified that the bull attacked because it was enraged by a fool. Suddenly, the judge showed up and asked if he had vanquished the horned bull. He had retorted, or else he and the mercenary would have long since been reduced to minced meat. The judge requested information and invited to accompany him, also mentioned that he had slain the kobolds that were lying close by. In general, he thought he and the mercenary had fulfilled the minimal. With the exception of the wounded boy and the mercenary who had agitated the horned bull, everyone passed the promotion exam as a result. The latter received harsh punishment as well. Overall, made some progress. Did not observe many changes, but he was aware that he was now 4th rank. Aside from that, missions had become more challenging. Even so, something had changed in his life. Now said the same thing every day when came back to the clinic. Welcome back. Strength and energy came from her. Was overburdened with work following the exam due to the numerous injuries. Was only relieved that nobody had suffered serious injuries. Was not shocked that attracted large crowds because of her golden hands. In addition, acknowledged that she had anticipated perverts would begin traveling too, but surprisingly that had not occurred. They should give credit for that, clarified. She served as guard dog, more accurately, her guard fox. Chose to tackle the routine task of eradicating beasts this time, which implied that fox ears would be used once more. Would accompany him. Such a partner did not sit well with. He attempted to clarify that he could go alone and that the task was simple. However, insisted that they were friends and that she had to accompany. Then recalled that he had proposed their friendship, a failure. Still, mercenaries of similar ranks typically worked together. Was ranked 4th and was ranked 2nd. A mercenary is not permitted to take on tasks higher than their rank. To put it another way, collaboration between lower and higher ranks was ineffective. Went on to say that she had enough savings and didn't need any money, could then keep the whole prize. Made the decision to support she thought wouldn't experience any dangerous situations. After all, was a master and was no longer able to overcome her. Although they were almost the same age, recognized that had undoubtedly put in a lot of effort. He felt ashamed in front of her and inferior in terms of money and skills. Heroes may receive guidance from, but a mercenary could better mentor. If he wanted to advance, advised him to take lessons from. Was asked to train him by, although she acknowledged that she still lacked experience, she pledged to assist in any manner she could. Was happy they had finally reached a consensus. Before long, was ruthlessly destroying forest animals. Commended him for making the most of his abilities. However, thought he ought to commend for her ability to quickly adjust to any weapon. That struck him as truly impressive. She claimed to be the best with a katana, but even she could see spear skills improving quickly. Had the sudden impression that someone was telling what to do. They eventually got rid of every monster, however, later discovered was injured. Strangely apologized to after examining her wound. Since she had greatly assisted him and he was not upset, he did not understand why she was apologizing. Treated her wound with healing magic without hesitation. His gaze grew wide. That was obviously not what she had anticipated from. Although acknowledged that it was his first time applying healing magic to someone else, he was relieved that he had done it correctly. Gasped, she was aware of how hard it was to become proficient in healing magic. Few people knew it, even within the guild. Additionally, was unaware of magic at the time of their first encounter. This indicated that he had picked it up quickly. Realized that was not a born genius who developed naturally. With effort, he got better. She was thrilled to see him up close. After admiring and examining her wound, she inquired about his healing training. Unsure of how to respond, froze. He hesitated, then explained that he had learned healing from. He chose to try since he knew a master. Was reminded of the mercenary he was unable to save during the exam. He made the decision to at least somewhat learn healing because of this. Told him he was absolutely correct, clenching her hand. When she inquired about her well-being. Responded that even with a good teacher, she was just impressed by how quickly he had picked things up. However, since could only heal scratches, he did not consider it remarkable. Then recommended that they eliminate the remaining monsters as soon as possible. He inquired about S's well-being after noticing her thoughtfulness. She even winced. However, she said she was okay and apologized. If she felt ill, asked her to let him know. After receiving the reward, made the decision to give it to, since it was pennies for a second rank, he apologized beforehand. However, stated that even if kept all the money, she would still be happy. She added that she had mainly obstructed him today, laughed and claimed that since he was the one who had been beaten, he should be fined. At last accepted the money with gratitude, gave her praise. After that he thanked and bid her farewell, saying he would see her in 3 days, stood there and watched him go. She held herself responsible for her failures that day and believed that, at this rate, she would never even be able to serve, much less serve as her mentor. She made an effort to train away her anxieties and relax. Abruptly, she heard someone call out to her. It was an employee of the guild. She was relieved had not yet departed. What happened? Asked. The employee sincerely apologized for giving her less money than she deserved. Assured her that it was nothing serious and advised her to simply exercise greater caution the next time. The employee apologized repeatedly. Pondered as she examined her coin pouch. She then traveled too. She stood at the door and thought about what she was going to do. She could go in right now and give the money to, or she could give it to when she saw him. Finally came in. The girls were soon sipping tea. Opened the door for and expressed regret for how things had gone. She clarified that would be running late today due to business. Apologized for interfering with her work and stated that it was not urgent. However, assured her that she shouldn't worry because she had invited her to tea and had already planned to close. Stated that she had desired to speak. His first concern was whether was hurrying into danger. She was concerned about the careless things he occasionally did. Retorted that was not in a hurry at the moment. Though she was intrigued, she could not believe he was capable of anything worse than before. Expressed her happiness at being his mentor, was pleased but she was embarrassed by that. After that, they conversed openly while sipping tea. Came to the conclusion that Doctor was a good girl after all, was enchanted as well, she thought would be content with and that she ought to back him. Abruptly stated that she had a question. Inquired as to his love for her. Was taken aback by that question and even asked for clarification. They were organizing spear at that moment in the forge. Observed that had bought the spear from an elderly man who proved to be a true expert in his field. At first glance, it was clear that he was a professional. Since the old man had also made him nice armor, agreed with that statement. The boy wondered suddenly who had made. Was surprised. She said that she was unaware of it and that it had been so long ago that she had already forgotten. Chose to ask again because he didn't think was being completely honest. However, maintained that she was telling the truth, just thanked for the dubious response. The boy observed that typically dismissed situations in this manner when she was merely unwilling to respond. Realized that one should keep their ear to the ground when using such a weapon. Then asked what he thought of, was taken aback by his inquiry. However, since the boy had been hanging out with this girl after the test, didn't find anything out of the ordinary. Then inquired as to what was trying to say about, either as an ally or as something more. Thought there was nothing to ask of an ally. She even believed that had observed something odd about, did not refute it at all. However, he reasoned that he might have misinterpreted everything. Then, having witnessed a lot of heroes in her lifetime, chose to respond to the boy's query directly. Had undoubtedly fallen in love with him, she said. According to the most common occurrence is a princess falling in love with a prince who skillfully rescued her from grave danger. Did not think of himself as a prince but recognized that he was a princess. Asserted that she was merely using metaphors, and the world would end if he truly were a prince. Those remarks infuriated a little, so he made the decision to threaten to break. However, was completely unfazed by that and even challenged the boy. However, thought was the type of person who really shines when helping others. Was in essence a dog. This statement shocked because after all was a fox. According to these incidents were typical among samurai. They give their entire being, body and soul to their master. It's only a matter of time until devotion turns into love if the master is also the opposite sex. gave these words some serious thought, then made the decision to assist the boy and inquired directly if was interested in him. In response, said that he was just perplexed. In the end, he would most likely still respond that he loved if someone asked him if he hated her. However, also thought it odd that had fallen in love with him. Additionally, it was still unclear whether his presumptions were accurate. Then counseled to have more self-confidence. She thought the boy was a very deserving man. Had fallen in love with him because he was so deserving. Such remarks embarrassed who thanked. He also mentioned that since he already had, he was unable to react to some emotions. Brave heroes have always been amorous, said, and there were many people with whole harems in this country. However, asserted that he was a commoner and that those who wore harems were aristocrats. Additionally, most commoners were monogamous. Furthermore, the boy realized that would undoubtedly not be happy if he also got as a girlfriend. However, asserted that she would disagree with about that. The boy then started to wonder, but why? They could use the right to keep everything secret, said. However, disliked leaping from one extreme to another, so he also asked to refrain from doing so. Then merely requested that the boy balance his personal and professional lives. It would be worse for him if he didn't overwork himself, even if it was for his beloved. However, wanted to start the next job in 3 days because he understood everything. He thought had fallen asleep when he arrived home late. To the boy's great surprise, however, greeted him. He made the decision to find out if the girl hadn't been sleeping. Responded that since night had just started, she didn't have time to sleep. Was taken aback, even could see was feeling very happy today. Even thought was acting exactly like they had on their first night together. Grabs hand at that moment and drew him in her direction. Abruptly, a fox's tail lit up next to the bed. As it happened, was half naked, was furious because she was dressed exactly like. One could argue that the boy lost his ability to speak. Next, told the boy that she and had changed into traditional attire from his native country. Embarrassed, asked what he thought of the outfit since it was the first time the girl had ever worn it. Simply turned his head away and stated that he was extremely uneasy when he saw her. One of his ears even drooped at those words. However, she also expressed gratitude for the kind of praise. At last inquired what does all of this mean, then, as if urging to speak, called out to her and pushed her forward a little. To gain courage, closed her eyes after first glancing at. She asked to let her stay the night with him after opening them. Asked the boy if he would grant her wish after he finished speaking. Was stunned, in case he wanted to know if knew what that meant. Responded that since she had proposed it herself, she understood everything, then was even more taken aback. Asserted that she would no longer engage in purely sexual relations with. Surprisingly, the girl realized that was a good person. The word, surprisingly, was the only one of those that found particularly striking. Went on to say that she had truly rejoiced when she found out about's feelings. That meant, after all, that someone else had recognized the charm of her beloved man. Although insisted that she had no doubts about the boy's love, she occasionally. Then inquired as to what she was unsure of. In response, the girl said that she questioned if she was deserving of by herself. Did not mind if he found a new love because of this. To put it mildly, was taken aback. Went on to say that although she was a doctor as well and could treat the boy's injuries, she would never fight alongside him. Conversely, could aid him in combat. The last question posed to was whether this was typical for her. The girl responded that there was only genuine joy in her heart. She was aware that her emotions most likely exceeded the bounds of normalcy, but she had no aversion to herself. Then reasoned that might be this way because she was a succubus. Suddenly recalled what had said as they were making their way home. Had previously stated that she would argue with about's unhappiness upon hearing that the boy had acquired a second girl. Then pondered's meaning. Went on to say that she would be content with spending even one night with the boy. She would be his katana no matter what, and she wouldn't leave him until death itself. According to, he might not have been the hero had imagined. It seemed to him that he was still unworthy of. But wasn't such a broken man that he would back down after a woman confided in him. The boy thought was adorable. Thus being merely a katana just did not fit the girl. Following those remarks, the three of them had a wonderful night together. Was taken to the following day by a girl named as it happened, had heard that was so intelligent that she might be able to become a court sorceress. However, she was so adorable that it was impossible to say that about her. Only believed that a cleric was the only thing he needed to locate. After all, he had already discovered a swordsman and a mage in place of. Had heard that Lady was also gifted with magic. Which of the two would embark on a journey with was still unknown. However, Lady would barely be permitted to leave because she was a member of the royal family, had to strain his brain's wrinkles because of this circumstance. Thought was a decent person as well. However, the entire issue was actually in her chest. Was unable to make a decision because of small chest, despite the fact that he knew it was improper to compare such things. Finally spoke to who had called him multiple times while he was deep in contemplation. He told the girl that they might be bothering her because they hadn't registered with, however, asserted that based on her data was most available at this time and they could visit her on a different day if today didn't work out. Was just concerned that he was consuming time. And finally had a face-to-face encounter with, nearly, inquired as to what they required. However, was so taken aback by his enormous chest that she blurted it out. The disparity in size was there, even declared that he was too cruel and made an appeal to God. Eventually calmed down and apologized for her inappropriate actions. Then started talking to, he started off by stating that since the monsters were killed, he and had not seen one another. As a result, the boy apologized for the unexpected visit, then made the decision to be direct. He clarified that the reason he was approaching was because she had actually rescued from the jaws of death. So he invited her to accompany them, also kindly requested assistance in overthrowing the Demon King. Didn't respond after giving it some thought. She lowered her head and stated that she had to decline. Was taken aback upon hearing the rejection. Then started attempting to make things right. This was a very noble mission, she said, and the state would give the girl everything she needed if she accepted their offer. Furthermore, would be able to grow her clinic according to. Holy Sword pointed out that was obviously exaggerating, but she was thinking correctly at the time. The sword then questioned the boy about what had transpired. Had a shocked expression after all. Comprehended, it brings back memories. This was a scene he had seen before. The boy then made the decision to ask why she had declined in order to verify his account. Responded that she was unable to part from the person she already loved. Realized everything at that very moment. It was the same old story. Speech was identical to his at that time. Just then and came into the clinic. Was taken aback upon seeing and. He began by speaking to and inquiring about the situation. However, took her time responding to the boy. Was staring at its enormous chest as the room fell silent. Then she turned away and muttered that she just didn't like chests. Glancing at, realized there was obviously a problem with the girl. Suddenly realized that had been silent the entire time. He felt a little uncomfortable about that. At that point, spoke to the boy and mentioned how long it had been since he and had seen one another. Given that they hadn't really seen one another since he had gone for the Holy Sword, agreed with. Was impressed since this was his first time seeing the Holy Sword. However, the aura was peculiar, became tense at that, then turned to and asked her to put their conversation out of her mind. After expressing regret for the disruption, departed. After his acquaintance left, who had no idea what had wanted, inquired. And exchanged odd looks at that point. They knew among themselves that had paid them both a visit, however, was completely perplexed and requested explanations. However, it was obvious that the girls had no intention of telling the boy anything. It would be their little female secret, they agreed. Was happy when she woke up the following morning and stretched. Two stunning girls slept on either side of him. Nearby, observed that had a busy evening, or rather, another exciting evening. Just thought was complaining like an elderly woman. The boy then started dressing. On the other hand, said that the boy had truly grown up and let go of everything superfluous. However, had some doubts about that. However, maintained that it was accurate and that she had assisted him in doing so. Claimed that he was hearing this for the first time when he heard complimenting herself. The boy eventually became aware that was observing his body as well, and the idea that she was obviously a cursed weapon returned to him. However, asserted that she had only magically changed weight and wasn't observing him, became even more perplexed by that statement. Thinking that he had not even noticed it himself, he started to examine his body, asserted that she had naturally attempted to hide all of this. And that's exactly what made the boy strong enough to keep going even when he was entertaining two girls, became enraged by those remarks and told to stop talking. Abruptly, he discovered the exact ring that had gifted him. The boy couldn't stop thinking about that girl, despite his love for her, and he was unable to let go of. The boy realized that it was only because of his adaptability and sensitivity that he had been able to establish such relationships. Concluded at that point that he was erratic and unfaithful. He was aware that they would eventually be dissatisfied with him. Nothing would work out with, realized, though he was aware of it, he continued to hold out hope. The boy ultimately concluded that these emotions would just go away quickly. After a while, the forest training went on. And were engaged in sword combat, said that was thinking too long because it was simple for him to attack the girl at that moment. Counseled to never relax during a battle and to always remember that the enemy could counterattack. Was able to injure after he missed a blow. Naturally, the girl started to worry right away. So she started inquiring about the boy's well-being, told the girl he was all right and asked for a moment, chose to apologize after realizing that she had gone too far. However, asserted that he was capable of self-healing such a wound. Additionally, he had requested that the girl not hold back. Questioned about his well-being after he sighed and stood up again. Was really cool, according to who was already standing firmly. She had defeated him even though the spear was not her weapon. Went on to tell that her father had taught her how to use a variety of weapons, and it was a privilege for her to know that those abilities had been useful. Went on to say that he was prepared for pain and that he would now depend on the girls. In that instance, said the boy was free to attack her at any time, furthermore, didn't intend to hesitate. Beginning at the 3rd rank, mercenaries are tasked with fighting humans in addition to eliminating monsters. Had heard that a lot of people lose battles against humans just because they fight them the same way they do monsters. Of course, said she could advise the boy on how to fight a human, but it would be better for him to learn on his own. Was prohibited from using enchantment and summoning during a battle with, thus, needed to work on honing his weaponry. As and continued to spar, considered how, to the best of his knowledge, strength was already on par with that of 2nd-rank mercenaries, considering that they had begun training simultaneously. Thus made it clear right away that he was the hero savior. If not, how would he go about taking down the Demon King? But was still a little annoyed because she knew that same and, to put it briefly, training and more training. Upon their return from training, told that she shouldn't always accept low-level positions, since the girl was the one who always accompanied him on these kinds of activities, felt compelled to apologize to her. However, the girl asserted that she chose to accompany, so he shouldn't be concerned. Had a few tasks to finish, but they didn't seem to be stagnant, so they wouldn't take long. Inquired about stagnant jobs because she did not understand what it meant. The boy was then informed by that jobs that were extremely challenging and costly were considered stagnant. They were practically useless, so nobody took them. Only held the 4th rank, which prevented from accompanying him on the tasks. Even so, continued, the boy was already capable of finishing tasks intended even for the 3rd rank. In actuality, did not even require healing anymore, and 4th-rank tasks did not seem particularly challenging to him. Claimed that query at that point persuaded her that her logic was sound. The girl then warned not to act carelessly while she was away. However, the boy felt that he ought to be the one to warn her to exercise caution. Standing close by, remarked that was exactly how it was at that precise moment. This was not an argument at all, angrily declared as she turned to face. Made the decision to go finish her work after hearing those words. The girl thanked for her concern and asked him to be careful one last time, abruptly halted and turned to face the boy he assumed had just forgotten something. The boy was greatly embarrassed when came up to him and planted a kiss on his cheek. The blushing didn't begin her task until after that kiss. Stood there touching the spot had kissed him as he watched the girl go. Thought was adorable at that very moment. Began to question whether it was smother after hearing those remarks. Then asked what his plans were after stating that she would go back to the clinic. responded that since he had nothing to do today, he would just take a walk around the market. After saying their goodbyes, they parted ways. It dawned on as he strolled through the market that he hadn't been by himself in a long time. It was then that revealed herself. The boy had completely forgotten about her, which infuriated her. She was genuinely hurt, so she asked him not to click his tongue, however, asserted that he was merely kidding. Then changed his words and mentioned that it had been a while since he and went for a walk by themselves. Was pleased with that wording as it sounded a little odd to be alone with a spear. Ultimately, and both uttered a single sentence. Well, whatever. It all sounded like two idiots talking to each other. Moved on from that, asked him not to keep secrets because she was happy to have a proper conversation with. Suddenly recalled perception that his weapon was not straightforward, despite the fact that he had kept a secret from and, essentially, had no compelling reasons to remain silent, but in case he wanted to speak with behind the girls' backs. Was deep in contemplation when asked him what he would do, reiterated that he had no plans in response. He went up to an apple stand and requested one. The boy then crunched the apple as he strolled through the marketplace. Observed that since moving to the capital he had developed a very particular diet, given the variety of items from across the nation in the capital, could relate to. Told that although he had been content in the village, he had become too accustomed to the city after moving to the capital. The boy then made the decision to have a bagel as well. The fact that was eating once more infuriated, however, thought it was perfectly acceptable. Suddenly remembered that the weather had been the same when he had first arrived in the capital. The boy had not yet had at the time, but he had met a lovely girl that he recalled. Disliked that he couldn't stop thinking about that girl, however, there was nothing he could do about it. He responded that he was once more chewing on a bittersweet page of his youth when questioned him about what was wrong. His only response was that, despite youth, people age quickly. His incoherent speech baffled, he couldn't even tell if she was kidding. The boy suddenly saw that a group of men had gathered around a girl who was obviously unhappy with the circumstances. As looked at that scene, he recalled how he had rescued from an attack in an alley. He thought it couldn't be her again because he couldn't believe what he was seeing. However, the boy made the decision to take action. He first used his spear to strike one of the criminals in the head. She had known it would be this way, said, from whom drops of blood were already streaming down. She even asserted that she now understood the boy. Himself observed that his mobility had improved. Responded that she had only made the enchantment weaker, was unhappy and questioned why she had done that. The boy should try swinging her now, said. In the worst scenario, she said, would just unintentionally crack someone's skull. A furious friend of the man had hit on the head hurried over to him while he was speaking with, and inquired as to what he believed he was doing. Asserted that they were the ones bothering a girl in the middle of the day, not him. However, the perpetrator asserted that had no right to meddle. It had just infuriated him, according to, if the fools wanted to make out with a girl, he suggested they go to the entertainment quarter. Attempted to explain to that was obviously at fault and that the offender was furious. Asserted that one mistake could have disastrous results. However, thought that since he was not at fault, there would be no wrong actions. The persona was attempting to project was now lost on. However, she was certain that had succeeded in showing off if that was his desire. The third man asked if he was the one who was always walking with after recognizing his spear. Mentally responded that specifically was the one who followed him. The first man noticed that was not with his trusted mistress today and grinned broadly. He deduced from that had only become more fearless after making friends with a formidable mercenary. Pleaded with the tense guys in his head to calm down. Since was supposed to settle the dispute, she didn't even understand why she was speaking. At last, started acting physically in addition to speaking. Grabbed the arrogant man by the top of his shirt, gave him a headbutt, and told him to stop talking and stay away from him. The man fell to the ground after being struck in the head. That had finally turned to force infuriated. However, the boy insisted that he had used his forehead rather than his hands. Didn't notice any change. The third man suddenly plucked up the courage to strike with his fist, however, used his hand to stop the fist. The boy then started to squeeze the arrogant man's fist. Squeezed his hand so hard that the man even went to his knees. Then warned, who was already taken aback, to release the boy's fist because he might crush it otherwise. And he experienced lightness once more as let go of the fist, told that the boy had just grown very strong because he had been carrying the weight of enchantment all day, examined his hand and was perplexed as to how he had gained such strength. Ultimately concluded that it didn't matter, and as the criminals were running away, the boy made the decision to inquire about the well-being of the girl who had been harassed by the scoundrels. Without glancing at the girl, posed his queries. He had spent too much time studying his hand. The girl gave a questioning thank you at that precise moment. With a sly smile, he inquired as to why she was thanking him in such a questioning manner. As was explaining that she could see the girl was taken aback because had handled everyone so skillfully, He realized that he had already experienced such a circumstance. The same actions, the same words. It was only then that the boy turned to face the girl he had rescued. Once more saved, it turned out that was the harassed girl. When realized this, she froze and only let out a questioning cry. After a while, guided by the hand once more through a back alley to a secure location. After the girl was secure, let go of her hand and expressed regret for using such force. Observed that had enchanted and now even a third girl, and they all had big chests, seemed to have some unusual luck with women, thought, had already started to believe this. The boy then added that it had been a while since they had seen one another, and she was just happy that the boy had come to her rescue once more. Was generally relieved that the girl was okay. He realized that if they were to somehow cross paths again, he would have wanted to tell her a lot of things. However, the conversation would not begin now that the boy had met her, was shocked to see that had turned into a mercenary at that precise moment. Had already pictured himself telling the girl that he had turned into a mercenary in order to purchase a woman, but the boy knew he couldn't say that. He merely stated that since life in the capital required money, the only option available to him without a title or education was to become a mercenary. Even though spears were an extremely uncommon weapon, also pointed out that used one. Clarified that he felt far more at ease using a spear than a sword. Felt uncomfortable after realizing how impolite it had been of her to say that. However, asserted that he was already accustomed to such discussions and that there was nothing horrible about it. The boy was more curious as to why she had been bothered by some guys once more, especially at such an early hour of the day. Started to say something but stopped, then ventured to believe that the girl had fled the mansion without knowing where to go once more. However, asserted that she was aware of her running route. Pondered, still not understanding anything. The girl then stated that she now had a purpose, whereas previously she had only desired a small amount of independence. Added that she made an effort to stay out of dimly lit alleyways. The girl acknowledged that the issue was that she just didn't know how to get where she wanted to go. Then realized what had happened. He surmised that those guys had approached the girl because she had chosen to ask for directions at a stall, and everyone already knew what was going to happen next. In that instance, inquired as to whether the location she needed to visit was close by. When informed that she had to visit a weapons store, was taken aback. It was the same one from which he had obtained his spear. The fact that was familiar with that gun store also caught off guard. Clarified that since coming to the capital, he had been a frequent patron of that store. The boy also mentioned that he got all of his equipment from that store. Since the shop owner was notorious for not doing anything if he did not like a customer, even if an aristocrat approached him, could not believe what the boy was saying. Realized then why the elderly man had shoved against him. On the other hand, awoke and proclaimed herself a real heroic weapon. Then questioned the girl about what she required from the elderly man. In response, said she wanted to ask him to finish a piece of jewelry. Was shocked to learn from the girl's words that the elderly man also completed tasks. Then, informed that the elderly man was actually a highly accomplished expert in a number of fields. However, primarily thought of that elderly man as a blacksmith of big swords. The boy chose to escort in that situation, because she didn't want to occupy the boy's time, felt ashamed. However, made a wise comment and held out his hand to, if you claim to be a mushroom, get into the basket. Then just depended on. And eventually arrived at the weapons store. Asked if the elderly man was present after taking a quick look inside. It turned out that the elderly man was at his place of employment. He pointed out that had brought a new girl, and he made fun of the boy by saying that if that happened, jealous people would just cut him down. The old man's comments infuriated, and thought there was nothing to object to. The elderly man had heard that heroes were attracted to women, but if pursued women all the time, his first girls would reject him. The old man's remarks infuriated so much that he told him to stop talking. The boy objected to the elderly man's remarks, particularly when was around. Took off her hood at that point and addressed the elderly man as master, stating how long it had been since they had last seen one another. Was shocked to learn that the elderly man and were, in fact, friends. However, he chose to just go because the boy had done his job as a guide. However, intervened and advised him against attempting to accrue additional points. The chances were still there, according to. At that point, the elderly man requested to be left alone with because he wanted to talk to her. Thinking incorrectly, said that he would report to the guards in that scenario. The elderly man then complained that the discussion was quite serious. Was instructed by to wait for her at the storefront and to scream right away if something happened. The elderly man was furious that he was viewed so negatively. However, laughed and winked, saying that she was only kidding. If so, went outside and asked to call immediately in case something went wrong. The elderly man was furious with his actions. He thought the boy was a womanizer. The old man acknowledged that he had not anticipated a visit from the princess without a bodyguard when left him and alone. However, implied to that she did, in fact, have a bodyguard. The elderly man then asked how and had met. The girl informed him that they had not seen each other since had saved her on the street. The elderly man realized that they had reconnected by coincidence today. He could even picture the disturbance that was currently taking place within the castle. He then made the decision to buy tea and apologized for the small refreshments. Since he was aware of his intelligence, he knew she had a significant reason for approaching him, then clarified that she wanted the elderly man to create something for her. Meanwhile, was conversing with while standing outside. Where had he first met? Questioned the boy. Started off by stating that it had happened on his first day in the capital. Described the story as having the plot of a classic romance novel, suitable for a book after he told her everything in detail. Made the decision to do that after he retired. Then inquired as to which noble family belonged to. In response, said he was unsure. He had no idea what the girl's name was taken aback that had not even inquired about the name of such a stunning woman with a huge breast. A non-womanizer would not engage with two girls, she asserted, just put his hands over his ears because he didn't want to listen. However, was unfazed. She used mental force to repeat what she had said, thought that was unjust. The boy thought he didn't need to know everything there was to know about, merely asked to acknowledge that he genuinely wanted to know every detail about the girl. Stopped talking. Asked the boy if he wanted her to explain how she had guessed after realizing she was correct. The girl's proportions were remarkable to start. Additionally, melted with pleasure the moment he laid eyes on his chest, wanted to hide somewhere because he felt so ashamed. This was not style at all, according to. The boy asked about it because he didn't understand what she meant. Clarified that she was aware of his willingness to do whatever it took to win a girl. Clarified that he was still a country bumpkin at the time, having just moved to the capital. Furthermore, was a girl from a wealthy family. As a result, all of those romantic tales were merely fairy tales. He and, in his opinion, had two different statuses. It would be a tale of love between individuals from disparate social classes, which did not actually occur. Deduced from the boy's words that he realized he had no chance right away. In that instance, she made the decision to advise the boy to try contacting at a later time. Those remarks infuriated, who then threatened to break. Apologized too for the wait as the store door opened at that precise moment. The girl explained that she had placed an order today and that the completed item would be delivered at a later time, then recommended that depart. According to, he just didn't want to get lost in the throng. He therefore requested permission to accompany the girl, observed the events and was perplexed by them because and appeared to be a charming couple at the moment. Additionally, gave the street food she had eaten when they first met. She was happy to taste it once more and thought it was great evidence that her trip to the city had not been in vain. Was still in shock that she was being fed something entirely different in the mansion. According to, she hardly ever had the chance to savor food flavors. She was happy to be able to choose what she wanted to eat here outside the castle. Advised to have as much fun as her soul desired in that situation. A young girl came up to at that point and pulled at his sleeve. With tears in her eyes, the girl asked where her mother was when he turned to face her. Thought that question was pretty good because he obviously didn't know the answer. Also realized that had located a child who had been lost. After that, picked the girl up and told her not to cry. He chose to cut short his outing with because he knew that children would not calm down at a single request, did not protest because she understood everything. Gave the girl and a piece of candy. After that, he and the women went in search of one of their mothers. Was taken aback by his adeptness with kids. She would not have been able to soothe a small child, the girl thought. Went on to say that he was born in a small village, however he had experienced it for the first time with a lost child. Then recommended that the girl be taken to the police station. Decided to go there because she thought it was a good idea. The astute girl then inquired as to whether the big brother and big sister were in love. That question even made blush. He made the decision to find out why the girl believed that. They were just very friendly, she retorted. Then made the decision to tell the girl everything. She expressed regret and clarified that she were not even a couple. Shuddered at its next words, the girl claimed that it had already been selected by her parents. The mother of the girl was eventually located, was reticent because she was sad, then mentioned how wonderful it was that they had located the mother of the lost girl. After and agreed, there was an extremely awkward silence. Continued by saying that she had spoken the whole truth and that she would soon wed the man her father had selected for her. Asked if he was surprised, observing his shocked expression. The boy didn't say anything. Continued by saying that she had known she would not be able to personally select her spouse because she was born into an aristocratic family. Asked the girl if she liked that. In response, said that in her situation, resignation had proven to be more effective than denial. The girl claimed that since she was brought up in such a manner, she had long realized that there was nothing that could be done. However, also acknowledged that she was no longer interested in getting married, because she could only be herself when she was walking with. Nobody may do anything or had any expectations of her. The girl was therefore free to do as she pleased. She was just happy to be able to hold his hand and touched him, then made the decision to speak to the girl. I already have 2 girls, he said. As it happened, was already aware of it. She had heard about it from her master. Both were regarded by as exceptionally talented, even too talented for someone like him. He made the decision to make them happy as a result. He sounded like a scoundrel and knew it. In his relationships with the girls, however, he just wanted to correct the record. He felt that he was just himself and that he did not currently belong to anyone. And made the decision to part ways while holding hands and staring into each other's eyes. And they released each other's hands after exchanging parting words. However, came to the conclusion that the residue in the heart was not that bad if experienced the same pain in her chest and soul. All the boy could hope for was that the miracle of meeting would occur a 3rd time. And his group were battling an iron grasshopper at the same moment, was on the team as well. It turned out that she had unintentionally met the hero while finishing a task and had temporarily joined their team. The girl was unsure of the reason behind his offer, but it was awkward to turn him down again because she had already formally rejected him once. Furthermore, thought she might discover something about her beloved because the hero and master were born in the same location. Observed that his team defeated the iron grasshopper with relative ease during the fight. Even though had acted strangely during their last encounter, her strength was on par with that of a second-rank mercenary. A boy claimed to be extremely fortunate, but his support magic was extremely accurate and reliable. Additionally, a young man by the name of was actually a first-rank mercenary. Lastly, he was the real hero savior. His rate of growth exceeded all expectations. Had accepted his offer to test the abilities of the man she had previously desired to acknowledge as her master, and she was genuinely impressed by him, saw as humanity's savior and hero. Was suddenly attacked by the iron grasshopper. The sword was successfully knocked from his grasp by the monster. The sword escaped the boy's grasp and landed close by. Was very concerned that had been left without a sword. She was about to run to his rescue when intervened. The girl was asked by the boy to just observe and not worry about anything. Used a summoning at that precise moment, and the holy sword materialized for him. Recalled who had also summoned, as carried out the summoning. Was astounded by the sight. The girl realized that, aside from their birthplace and the hero-savior had nothing in common at first glance, but now their pictures seemed to overlap. The girl then posed a query to herself. Who is the hero savior exactly? What distinguishes him from the brave hero? After a while, and were walking through the capital streets together. Wanted to know how it was doing. Responded that was doing well and that she had even been asked to send greetings. Naturally, was taken aback upon discovering that had dated. He was just happy the girl was back though. On the other hand, was delighted that her devotion to Master remained unwavering despite the fact that she had completely changed her mind about the hero savior following that spectacle. On the other hand, kept thinking about how quickly was gaining strength. Asserted that it was all due to the fact that every selected hero was just abnormal. Suddenly, wondered who had told about the hero savior. She appeared to be far too knowledgeable. Even so, thought it made sense because was a hero. Was confident that would vanquish the demon lord. The boy himself only wished to establish a quiet career, grow into a respectable man for and then peacefully pass away. However, cautioned against dreaming of a tranquil existence. Was so incensed by those remarks that he vowed to retire and throw in the furnace, and eventually made it to the guild. Should embark on a mission to eradicate goblins, proposed. However, thought the boy was already too weak for goblins. She was just underestimating goblins, said angrily, nearly leaped at that statement. Goblins, according to, were minor foes, but unlike kobolds and big rats, there was absolutely nothing to gain from them. Rats had meat, and kobolds at least had valuable hides. However, the number of goblins increased rapidly due to their frantic reproduction. Goblins even more because, according to, no one wanted to deal with them. The boy was aware that things would get really bad after goblins had constructed a whole lair, and that one might not even have time to blink. Continued to think that a single lair posed little threat. Then clarified that while mercenaries could manage a lair, an amateur would undoubtedly meet his demise if he came across goblins. The boy then made the decision to ask a guild employee how long this notice had been there. The worker retorted that the notice had been posted a week ago or the other day. After giving it some thought, concluded that goblins could at most hurt humans. The boy was just baffled as to why the guild consistently disregarded such issues. He hurriedly left the guild after accepting the quest, could hardly comprehend what was going on. She didn't ask to explain everything until she caught up with him outside. First, expressed regret for her slight hurry, then questioned whether goblins were truly such terrifying foes. The girl was informed by that goblins could set up shop anywhere, frequently in close proximity to populated areas. This was due to the fact that these creatures were primarily hunters. However, they were also raiders at the same time. According to, this is the reason goblins fully realized that attacking people was the simplest way to live as comfortably as possible. Then realized everything. She was appalled by the entire circumstance. Continued by saying that the goblins had chosen to live in a cave close to the village specifically because of the nearby village. Then discovered that the cave served as the goblins' base for a potential assault on the village, and that was not good. The girl realized now the gravity of the situation. However, she was perplexed as to his extensive knowledge of goblin life. All knew about the boy was that he was from a village. Clarified that goblins were frequently discussed in villages. He advised the girl to go get ready for the quest and to speak less. Had purchased a brand new cookery that would be extremely useful in a cave after visiting the weapons store. Was also advised to take something akin to a talisman by the elderly shopkeeper. The elderly man clarified that he wanted to give the boy this blade because he did not want to lose a loyal client in combat. Such a gift, in his opinion, was excessively generous for a frequent customer. The elderly man merely warned that he would never be forgiven if he lost this talisman. Bid the elderly man farewell after realizing the significance of the talisman. The group then made the decision to bring along. Naturally, wasn't sure if they should bring. He was concerned. However, thought that if goblins attacked the village, the wounded would require medical attention. Could not comprehend opposition to her taking part in this quest. She figured the boy just thought she was a frail, weak girl. She asked to toss an apple into the air in order to disprove this. Pulled out a knife and threw it at the apple after threw it. Next to the knife sliced the apple in two and sank into the surface. The boy was a little taken aback by the sudden trick. Housewives like her, continued, had long since mastered more than just flirting and seduction. The girl said she wouldn't interfere because the world wasn't that straightforward. They were riding in a carriage when the driver abruptly yelled that smoke was rising over the village. With haste, the group leaned out and peered off into the distance. It was true that the black smoke was getting thicker over the village, told that he smelled blood at that precise moment. Then inquired about the distance to the village from the driver. They could already run there on foot, he said. Then requested that the driver stop the wagon. Since it was significantly faster than the others, he gave her the order to proceed. Gave the driver instructions to go back to the capital and let the guild know that the village had been attacked by monsters. Although he agreed, the driver questioned the boy about his future, responded that he had work to do. They were astounded by what they saw when they arrived in the village. Blood and devastation were all around. However, remained calm and gave the order to proceed and look for survivors. Was asked to lead the way by the boy, then declared that no one was alive in the area, but there weren't enough corpses for a village like that. Deduced from this that the attack had occurred not long ago. Asserted that the settlement center was home to the living, and goblins were also congregating there incidentally. Then informed that since nobody was left in the village, they would go to the center. Reassured him that she was already aware of that. The people lying around did not give the girl a sense of power. Realized then that had used the power of a succubus to comprehend everything. For the benefit of those they were unable to save, ultimately recommended that visit the center and save as many people as she could. And eventually found themselves close to the goblins. Made the snap decision to cut through the throng of monsters. The boy employed enchantment at the same moment. And went to with little difficulty. Asked how she was right away. In response, the girl said she was doing just fine. The survivors were all inside a building, she clarified. Additionally, the goblins had nearly destroyed the door when she got there. Asked to tend to the churches injured. Some people's lives were in jeopardy. Immediately went to assist the wounded while warning the others to exercise caution. Following departure, acknowledged that she had misjudged goblins due to her lack of experience, as all the villagers would have perished if they hadn't hurried. The girl said she was deeply embarrassed and admitted her error. On the other hand, advised them to get rid of the goblins in the village before becoming angry. Was asked by the boy to focus solely on saving lives at this moment. Was now getting ready for combat as well. Was also relieved that her best moment had arrived. Attacked the goblins without thinking and started piercing them with his spear. The spear became stuck and would not come out when the boy drove it into another goblin, and that's when another goblin started to move in. Was perplexed. Advised him to employ a fallback strategy. Recalling that he had another weapon, employed it. The boy was now happy that he had bought it, warned not to get sidetracked because the goblins were attacking. The sheer number of creatures in front of astounded him. Announced that she had excellent news for the boy at that precise moment. Recommended that begin by sharing the good news. First of all, the number of goblins had decreased. Surmised that all the nearby goblins had congregated here. Then asked what the very good news was while continuing to battle the goblins. The goblin boss was coming here, retorted. Was furious. It is obvious that he did not think such news was good. However, asserted that only his bewildered pawns would be left if the boy destroyed the boss. It would therefore be much simpler for the boy to eliminate everyone. Promised that since it was like killing monsters, their leader would undoubtedly be a brute. Realized that, in essence, it would be the Goblin King this time around instead of the Kobold King the previous time. The Goblin Boss's moniker did not sit well with, she thought it was too cheap. Expressed regret for his vocabulary and attributed it to a lack of taste. Nervously called out to at that precise moment, requesting that he turn around. A troll loomed in the distance. The group realized right away that he was the goblin leader. Cautioned that and he alone would not be able to handle it. To handle the tiny goblins, they required at least one additional person. Then showed up, prepared to assist and... So rival pleased now and could eliminate the minions and could defeat the boss. An ideal equilibrium, however, thought there was a quicker route. He turned to and asked her to give an honest, unreserved response. Which was more resilient, the troll or the Kobold King? Thought the Kobold King was more resilient. In that instance, turned to and asked for her assistance, warning her that he was going to act a little crazy. Was already starting to speculate about plans. The boy used enchantment first. Then he hurled the spear with tremendous force directly at the troll. The troll's head was severed when the spear struck it quickly. The troll's only option was to fall to the ground, dead. Even the goblins were taken aback by this unexpected turn of events, suddenly collapsed to his knees and let out a painful cry. The boy, dejected, turned to his beloved for assistance, immediately ran to him and applied healing magic. As healed, he only glanced at and realized that he couldn't let her handle the goblins by herself, then told to come back to him. Came back right away and started to admire. The boy's actions pleased her. She loved him because of this. Was only asked to calm down by, had the opportunity to commend her as well, so was furious that she was being silenced. Suddenly questioned how he had struck the troll's head with such accuracy. It was all because of her, clarified. Although she had not previously informed, could generally move to a certain degree without the boy's assistance, but all she could manage was a slight tug at clothes, and since had only marginally changed the course, merit still accounted for 80% of it. Completed the healing at that precise moment. After thanking the girl for saving him, was prepared to resume his activities, asked to get ready for something when they got home because she was a little offended that he always put himself in danger. Thus, there was still some work for the group to do. After gathering all of the goblins, they started to consider their options. In the meantime, spoke with the villagers who were overjoyed to have been spared. Ultimately, the group spent the night in a room that was empty. Informed the boy that perhaps the circumstances had been unusual while was tending to wounds. The girl acknowledged that goblins were treated too carelessly by mercenaries, but she thought this was because the army periodically cleared the area around the capital of monsters. Then questioned how to account for the monster outbreak in that scenario. Clarified that the mercenaries guild, not the army, was in charge of handling it because inexperienced mercenaries made their living in that forest. In that instance, realized that the reason behind the large number of goblins was still a mystery. Also couldn't figure out the origin of that troll. The villagers said they had never seen trolls in the area, according to, given that such a brute posed a far bigger threat than goblins could understand them. The boy thought that the troll had somehow joined them here. According to, trolls frequently led goblins, but she had never heard of them constructing a base on purpose and getting ready to attack a human settlement. Even in the absence of such preparation, these monsters could have easily destroyed the village. The group ultimately came to the conclusion that the more they tried to make sense of the situation, the more perplexing it became. Then recommended that they demolish the goblin lair first thing tomorrow morning before considering the other options. When everyone was prepared the following day, made the decision to visit the goblin lair. Abruptly, however, a wagon came toward them. Mercenary troops emerged from it, believed that reinforcements had come. In the meantime, the driver spoke to and informed her that he had a letter from the guild for her. Took the letter and they started reading it together. We urgently need you to return to the capital and turn over the current quest to the mercenaries who are arriving. The city is about to be overrun by a massive horde of crazed creatures. We command you to immediately assist in thwarting the attack on behalf of the guild. Was shocked by what was written. At that point, everyone in the group understood. The situation had become dire. The mercenary then announced that other mercenaries would now take care of the remaining tasks. Additionally, the group could travel to the city using the wagon, then made the decision to give the mercenary a brief explanation of what was going on in that village. Then turned to face, she desired for the boy to accompany her. Immediately understanding the girl, declared that he would accompany her anyhow. Gave the boy his thanks. After that, made the decision to leave and invited to accompany them. The mercenary, hinting at, angrily questioned whether truly wanted to bring a lackey with her. Was obviously offended by those remarks. She quickly pulled out her katana and threatened the chatty mercenary. Observing what was going on, asked if he thought was extremely irritable. Concurred with. The boy asked the girl to calm down because he thought was expressing her feelings directly. Obeyed and took the mercenary's neck from her blade. However, she requested that the mercenary consider the fact that disparaging her master was a direct insult to her, and he shouldn't expect mercy if he dared to say something like that once more. Went on to say that had vanquished the troll she had mentioned because he had misinterpreted the situation. Was only 4th rank, so the mercenary was taken aback when he heard this. According to, a mercenary's rank did not accurately represent his actual prowess and strength. The group eventually found themselves seated in the wagon and traveling in the direction of the capital. Spoke to, and since she knew right away what the subject would be, she apologized beforehand for her lack of self-control, then gave the girl a quick tap on the head. Rested his head on his hand and stated that while he didn't give a damn about what other people thought of him, he wasn't the type to intentionally spread false information about himself. As a result, the boy asked to be kinder to such fools. acknowledged her error and pledged to exercise greater caution going forward. For that, gave her a pat on the head. The group encountered disapproving glances upon arriving in the capital. While believed she had to wait outside for while she was in the guild, made the decision to go back to the clinic and restock her medication. Also asked to listen in on conversation after he had left. Made the decision to pay attention and give the boy the most crucial information. Thus, it all began when they were battling a group of goblins yesterday afternoon. On the way to the capital, hordes of beasts appeared out of nowhere. Luckily, the increase in their numbers in nearby territories had led to the reinforcement of the capital's defenses. Thus, the first wave was easily repulsed by the city garrison. But later on, new beast armies emerged. They initially thought it was a frenzy, but since every beast was of a different race, that theory was ruled out. The army asked the guild for assistance because they thought the situation was dire, and other mercenaries ranked higher than second were therefore instructed to gather. Since they had not seen a single beast corpse on the journey to the capital, was perplexed by such statements. Then, according to, the beasts had come up on the road in the opposite direction from their previous course. However, was still perplexed as to how a large number of beasts could have appeared out of nowhere, thought it had to do with summoning magic. She asserted that this magic required skill in addition to being extremely complex. It was frightening, said, because someone could call forth hundreds of beasts multiple times, not just a dozen. At that moment, realized that if summoning magic was indeed the root of all this chaos, someone was responsible. However, didn't think it was a human. She said that since their well-known hero savior was on his way to the capital, handling everything would be simple with him. That was all could hope. Was in fact traveling to the capital at the time with a lot of anxiety. Reassured him, the girl asserted that a group of court magicians provided support to the capital's formidable garrison. Thought they would definitely win. Went on to say that the capital was defended by more than just the army and court magicians. He asserted that because of the gravity of the situation, this was no longer a fire on someone else's shore for the guild. Thus, the kingdom must have already requested assistance from the guild. In an emergency, continued, the guild could call its mercenaries by force. This was confirmed by, who also mentioned that a contract was signed by all mercenaries higher than second rank. They also had to pay a fine for their refusal. A demotion or expulsion from the guild would be the worst outcome, but in any case, thought everyone above second rank was weird. He reasoned that they had most likely hurried to battle the beasts with great eagerness. Then questioned how the church would act in that circumstance. After giving it some thought, replied that, like the guild, the church acted right away. At the very least, field clinics would be established because the hero was already on the way. They were meant to save human lives after all. Found the sound of those words to be rather disagreeable. Continued by saying that the church just had a lot of formalities. They publicly declared their neutrality, but the circumstances made that strategy unfeasible at the time. Who had been listening to his words became aware that was completely different from other church employees at that point. Was a very capable monk, according to Sword, but it seems that his character had prevented him from staying in one place. The wagon started to get closer to the capital at that point, and was standing there at that moment considering his course of action. But there was no time to think any more, thought. The guild's doors opened at that point and a large number of people started to leave. Was one of them, she ran to as soon as she called out to him. Declared right away that he already knew what was going on. The boy then asked if she would join the fight. In response, she said she would go. However, she also wondered if would attend. Received an apology from who also declared that he would stay in the capital and not participate in the conflict. Was taken aback by his careless remarks. However, since there was nothing to do, the girl just walked away. Eventually met, the girl was obviously rushing, so the boy asked her right away, "Where are you going?" In response, said she was going to the field clinic that was set up close to the gates. Then asked the boy why the bells had rung and where was. Clarified that had stayed behind while he went to battle the beasts. Was shocked to learn that. However, the girl was relieved that the boy would stay rather than endanger his life. She simply advised him to exercise caution before continuing, observed the true greatness of women, felt that he didn't deserve them at all, and he agreed with. Then questioned about his true plans. According to, he had no compelling reason. He was just as bored as everyone else doing the same thing. He was even a little offended by it, but thought it was too much to think that way right now. Then acknowledged that he had used the word bored exaggeratedly, but the fact that everyone behaved in the same manner really bothered him. It wasn't the best idea, the boy thought. Even after paying close attention, was still unable to grasp his point. Went on to say that he thought everyone was too preoccupied with what was going on outside the walls. Someone should stay inside, the boy thought, just in case. This strategy is known as a fool's bet in the gambling industry. The reason it pays well if it wins is because no one wagers on that position. If something that others believe is impossible becomes a reality, it gains value, and nobody loses anything if it doesn't. Thought he should remain in case human hands were actually responsible for the entire issue. Suddenly saw something strange behind him, clarified right away that it was a magical summoning circle. The boy realized at that point that he would need to put in some extra work. The boy immediately charged at the stranger seated close to the circle and swung his spear at him. The fact that actually did not spare anyone shocked. He had not even considered the possibility of obtaining information from the stranger. He had just killed him. Asserted that he lacked the intelligence to question someone. But all of a sudden saw that wager had paid off. It was a demon. When learned that he had just defeated a demon, she was a little taken aback. Even he had not anticipated making the right guess, and everyone would have just laughed at him if he had been mistaken. Then requested that look for the demon close to the neck. At first, couldn't even tell if was serious. However, she asserted that she was being completely serious. Discovered a particular cult symbol after doing some searching. Clarified that a sword was the emblem of the hero in this nation. Had just discovered a broken sword. Therefore, it was an indication that the hero was opposed by cultists. Not very nice fellows, to put it briefly. Was shocked to learn that they had not come across a random demon. While summoning circles outside the capital made sense to, the threat of enemies operating inside the city was too great. According to, the demon was not a threat because the circle it was attempting to form was not complete. However, hordes of beasts would rush to that location the moment a few more lines were added. Then pondered how to break the circle. A magical circle, according to, always had a central idea. The circle would need to be completely redrawn without it. Then requested that strike the spot she indicated. Hit the spot indicated without hesitation. The circle then started to erase itself. And acknowledged how much he had hoped his premonition was incorrect after the circle had already vanished. Questioned after she failed to reply to those remarks. What's wrong? He called out to. Claimed that she respected him because, despite wanting his intuition to be incorrect, he chose to follow it. However, did not fully comprehend its meaning. Went on to say that people typically disapproved of when their efforts were in vain and criticized those who did so. However, was prepared to put in a lot of effort without getting anything in return if needed. According to, this is precisely what made cool. Was taken aback by his compliments. However, he made the decision to move on and not think about it. Couldn't tell where was heading. However, she soon came to the conclusion that there was no guarantee that the capital was home to a single magical circle. Decided to search everything and, if necessary, destroy them because that was exactly what he had been thinking. However, made the decision to take action first. The artifact they had given him during the rank promotion exam was removed from his pocket. It had never even occurred to that this thing would be useful, but now it was just astounded by his foresight. Hurled the artifact to the ground without thinking, and then there was a blast. Even shielded his ears from the roar. That was fortunate, though, because the people who were still inside the castle would undoubtedly hear it. Chose to continue running because he knew he couldn't let himself get caught. And his team had arrived in the capital a few hours prior. A guild representative greeted them and started congratulating them right away, saying that hundreds of people would be protected with them. However, asked the man to stop praising him right away and explain what was going on instead. The guild employee clarified that although there were too many of the beasts, they weren't particularly powerful. Additionally, some soldiers had frequently reported seeing magical circles that glowed on the battlefield. Surmised that these were magical circles of mass summoning at that precise moment. According to the worker, they also believed that animals were probably coming out of the circles in unending streams. Realized that in that scenario, all they had to do was demolish the circles. According to the worker, they really wanted to destroy them, but there were many animals all around. As a result, and his group were asked to clear a path by the guild and the entire capital. Readily consented to assist. The employee thanked him and reiterated that the plan would undoubtedly be carried out with the help of the team and the hero. Additionally, he said that the group would have to wait a little while mercenaries were being assembled for the breakthrough squad. Was walking by at the time when saw her, she yelled, halted and turned, asked the girl if she would be part of the breakthrough squad. Yes, I will be there, she replied, then inquired as to his location. Had remained in the capital, clarified, was startled to learn that. Clarified that was not obligated to fight because she was a 4th-rank mercenary. He was just not required to, however, thought that even if lacked some common sense, he should at least have a sense of justice. Thought of as a friend, he now understood that was prepared to send a loved one into combat by themselves. Was disappointed in, after learning that he was just waiting in a secure location. Then, Sacred Sword revealed that had actually been a weak person, should never have thought of as a friend, according to, called out to him at that precise moment. She could tell by his expression that he had misinterpreted everything. The girl clarified that decision to remain in the capital was not motivated by cowardice. However, he had determined that it was necessary. Couldn't see how there could be a need in that circumstance. Said she didn't know, but she would certainly not object if had decided to act that way. Thought that in an emergency they ought to have cooperated. Asserted, however, that had remained in the capital just in case nothing came of it. Was beyond comprehension. According to the girl, might have purposefully taken the chance that his choice would prove to be pointless. Explained that had sent her into battle by herself because he did not want her to act in vain either. Was even more taken aback by those words. He was just unable to understand what was saying. Was also unable to decipher his thoughts, because no one would commend him for making such a choice. Instead, they would prefer to condemn him. In other words, if nothing happened, stay in the capital would have been in vain. Was left perplexed and unable to comprehend anything as a result. He had just one more question concerning, how could he have made that decision? An explosion erupted in the capital at that precise moment. The artifact was thrown by as a signal, then became aware that something had actually occurred in the capital. She made the hasty decision to go back to the capital. Additionally, she requested that inform the captain that she was unable to take part in the operation. Was not someone wanted to let go. However, the girl asserted that the team could function well without her involvement, particularly considering that the squad included 1st-rank mercenaries who were considerably more powerful than she. At that moment was close. After hearing his remarks, he made the decision to converse with her. According to the boy, she ran the risk of breaking the mercenary code and becoming known as someone who ran away from the battlefield where the hero was engaged in combat. Could only reply to his remarks with a single phrase. What the heck, showed no concern at all for. Finally bid the group farewell, then went up to and informed her that everything was prepared for departure. The boy then made the decision to follow the plan. Additionally, he made an effort to remember to inform the captain about Lady. One of the mercenaries then rushed toward the group while yelling. He proclaimed loudly that the capital was now home to beasts. Had approached the elderly man a few days prior with a request. He was the one who made the holy sword scabbard, so she turned to face him. There was a long-standing custom in which a person would give a sword to the person they had feelings for. Although this tradition was no longer followed, the sword had come to represent the state. Giving someone a sword here therefore meant entrusting them with your life. Chose to give the sword to the hero savior, who would undoubtedly marry her in the future, instead of the man who had originally given it to her. In order to finally end her unrequited feelings for the person she would most likely never see again, the girl wished this, but she never would have thought she would run into him again. Although the girl was aware that these emotions would not benefit her, they nevertheless overflowed her heart and persisted. However, was aware that she would eventually marry the hero savior. She therefore desired to at least give her heart and the sword to him rather than the hero. Knowing that would have this sword, the girl just wanted to live. In addition, the boy already had 2 cherished ones. However, remained hopeful that she and would be together in spite of everything. In the midst of all these dreams, was called to. She stood close to a reporter and the king. When the king saw that was deep in thought, he summoned her, snapped out of it and saw the reporter and the king's shocked expressions. The girl then expressed regret and requested that the reporter document the incident. The reporter claimed that the team dispatched to identify the signal bomb's origin had come across beasts. Additionally, a number of magical circles for summoning had been found, which is likely where the beasts were coming from. At that point, understood that the invasion outside the capital had been merely a diversion. The king concurred with what his daughter had said, also wanted to know if there had been any casualties on the squad. Fortunately, the reporter replied the squad had dealt with the beasts and were unharmed. Additionally, they had heard that multiple magical circles had already been destroyed. It was all because of that explosion. The king then questioned why this had gone unnoticed by the court magicians. The courtiers retorted that those magical circles had been formed right before the invasion, not beforehand. They said that if every circle had been activated simultaneously, they would have noticed right away. This suggests that the capital could prevent more damage by destroying the circles prior to activation. Then gave the order for the group of magicians to go find the magical circles. Additionally, they could ask the squads already in action for assistance if needed. The courtiers and started executing the directive right away. Breathed a sigh of relief when all the outsiders had departed, but then the king uttered a word. "My daughter, you can tell immediately." His eyes widened in shock at those words. In the end, the king was just relieved that had handled everything on her own and that he didn't even have to give orders to the servants. Requested that her father refrain from complimenting her. Given that he was the king, she counseled him to take things more seriously. The king chuckled at its continued harshness. The girl would not have enough strength if she didn't relax, the father said. If we're that serious, the king said, the hero would not fall in love with her. In response, stated that she didn't give a damn if the hero didn't fall in love with her. The king became aware that was not excited about her impending marriage to the hero at that precise moment. He was aware that it might be early, but the king intended to ask the hero to marry as soon as everything was settled. He then inquired as to whether had objected. Naturally lied. In response, she stated that she had no objections at all and that she would marry the world's hope and hero savior. There could be no greater honor, the girl asserted. Indeed, that wasn't true at all, since had given the sword. His only concern at this point was whether the boy had gotten the sword. A concerned servant hurried into the king's chambers as the door opened at that precise moment. The hero joined the squad fighting outside the capital, he reported. About a dozen other mercenaries and one second-rank mercenary had left the battlefield at the same time. Initially, the king inquired about the identity of the second-rank mercenary who had departed from combat. In response, the reporter said it was a mercenary. Was stunned to hear these words. She was aware of his high level of responsibility and was baffled as to why she had broken the rules. Suddenly recalled statement that she had already met the master to whom she would be devoted forever. Realized everything at that point. Had left the battlefield because of. Asked the reporter one question to verify this. Was the signal explosion visible outside the capital? She inquired. At first, the reporter did not grasp its meaning. However, he then declared with assurance that the signal had been observed. He had actually witnessed a glowing sphere flare over the capital. Then realized that had probably also witnessed the explosion. Someone had reported that there had been unrest in the capital with that signal. Was certain that was the first person to discover the beasts inside the city walls. Even from the magical circles, it was evident that someone was responsible for this incident, but the girl did not realize how carefully the culprit had planned everything. Meanwhile, the king implied that the criminal had not anticipated the swift destruction of his magical circles in the capital. The capital was unable to ignore the hordes of beasts that the stranger first called forth. He then compelled the majority of the mercenaries and soldiers to evacuate the capital. He then planned to turn on the capital's circles so that mayhem could break out. The king thought this plan was very straightforward, but it worked. However, nobody was able to comprehend one thing: who needed to take such action. The king thought that how to foil the scheme was more crucial than who was behind it at this point. The king realized that although the stranger's plan was straightforward, it would be impossible for the average person to set up so many circles in the capital so rapidly. It was therefore improbable that such a competent person had conceived this scheme only to cause mayhem. The villain would undoubtedly take the next step, the king asserted. Herself realized everything at that point. She recognized the criminal's actual objective. The royal castle was the location. At that time, reckless children who had left their homes were being chased by beasts as they ran through the capital. A boy rushed outside to have a quick look at the creatures, but he quickly regretted it because a monster started pursuing him. If the boy hadn't stumbled, everything would have been all right. He collapsed onto the ground, face down, and was utterly hopeless. But assistance arrived. With a single thrust of his spear was the one who killed the beast. When the boy opened his eyes, Spear was the first thing he saw, turned to face the boy and reprimanded him right away because he was in danger. Then chose to carry the boy to the closest house after tucking him under his arm. As soon as threatened to smash the door, a woman opened it. Then, because the commotion would not stop, the boy gave the woman the child and asked her to look after the restless one. Added that if she took the boy to his parents later, he would be even more appreciative. After bidding his new friends farewell, the boy hurried away. Said he had saved the boy's life while was running, however, would continue to debate whether his actions were appropriate. Given his lack of time, thought there was nothing he could do about it. Instead, he asked to point out additional magical circles. If they weren't destroyed, there would be a lot of problems later. Guided to another circle after a few minutes. After destroying the circle, the boy's only thought was about how many more circles like that existed in the capital. Was also in the dark. Then, without even getting anyone's consent, made the decision to beat up this criminal right away. However, urged to not be lazy and to at least inquire. Because he was by himself, just did not want to waste time on conversations. Demons ceased to appear after the fifth circle, therefore believed that the criminal's scheme was coming to a close, then inquired about his next move. Retorted that he didn't know because he didn't want to put too much strain on his mind, but he was certain of one thing: he had no assistance. Had good news for in that scenario. As it happened, he was being approached by a group of armed individuals. Among those men, recognized one. He had previously seen him. Also identified the man and told that the hero had come up to him with warriors during the beast frenzy. One of them was this man, the team's captain apparently, however did not recall because he had nearly died at the time. Since all mercenaries had been told to fight outside the capital, the captain first questioned about his purpose for being here. Fortunately, replied he was low rank, he was therefore exempt from the order. The captain then recognized that the signal had come from, could barely manage everything on his own, so he was just relieved that the signal had been picked up. After promising to explain everything later, the boy now proposed talking about something more significant. How well did the group comprehend the circumstances then? The captain retorted that they had come across a few magical circles and a small band of beasts en route here. The same had been reported by other squads. And one more thing, although the group had heard rumors of demons, it was still unclear if they were real. Realized now that the soldiers already knew what was most crucial. He also mentioned that he had just killed 2 demons. The captain was somewhat taken aback by this statement, then inquired as to how many circles the group had destroyed. The captain retorted that they had destroyed 4 circles en route. Several more had been destroyed by other squads. In that scenario, adding the circles that destroyed would result in 10. The captain deduced that had destroyed 6 magical circles after hearing this and using some mathematical knowledge. The captain was startled by this. Right then, asked how many circles might be required to cover the whole capital. About 20 circles would probably do, retorted. Additionally, the capital had already eliminated over half of its population since, and the captain had already destroyed 10, and other squads were also at work. Was happy about this since it would allow them to separate and he wouldn't have to run around the city. Alternatively, behave as a group. A happy appeared on the horizon at that precise moment. Froze upon seeing her. His first question was, "Why is here?" Merely expressed regret to the boy for the wait. Frustrated, put his hand over his face and claimed he hadn't been waiting for her at all. The boy then inquired once more as to why she had come. Retorted that because she had dispersed those signal bombs, she had noticed the explosion right away. Then inquired about the capital's defense. Responded with pleasure, saying that she had trusted the hero's team with the defense. Then questioned who was behind. The girl retorted that she had no idea and that those individuals had just followed her. Then implied that these unexpected visitors had only wished to profit from his withdrawal from combat, since there were benefits as well, had already accepted his presence. For instance, there were now more helping hands. However, the surprises didn't stop there. Was even more shocked when rushed to assist. According to, she witnessed sprint past the field clinic. Additionally, she had witnessed the signal explosion earlier and assumed was to blame. As a result, beloved was unable to avoid her. Incredulous, questioned if the field clinic could wait. in response, said that the clinic had enough doctors and could function without her. In that instance, finally gave the two girls a hug and acknowledged how nice it felt to be with his loved ones in that circumstance. Then asked to describe the situation. In response, said he would go over everything. The boy then yelled at the captain, saying that he would go destroy circles and that the group could decide how to proceed. Pointed out something odd in the sky at that precise moment, noticed it and looked up as well. Above the castle, a sizable portal that looked like a painting emerged. When the king and princess saw this, they were both unsure of what to do. Will therefore turn into a man in order to defend the girl he loves. The enemy attacks the royal castle while everyone is preoccupied with the conflicts taking place both inside and outside the capital. The king therefore thought this strategy was straightforward but successful. However, was certain of one thing: the adversary is already familiar with how to enter the royal castle. Two figures entered the king's chambers at that precise moment. The king's servant was one of them, and the other was a stranger. The stranger started looking through the king's rooms right away. Without further explanations, father understood her when she called out to him. The king immediately ordered the attendants to go up to the stranger and ask all the questions they had. And the door to the chambers opened wide as the attendants started to move toward the stranger. The messenger was the one. He loudly and rapidly clarified that the squad captain had requested that he notify the king of the situation immediately. As it happened, they discovered a demon-like figure inside the castle. Additionally, two demon corpses were found near the castle. At that moment, realized it was not good. Was startled when the stranger pulled out a magic stone and tossed it aside, causing all of the king's courtiers to flee. In an effort to save time, also used a fireball and aimed it at the stranger. However, a magician in the king's court created a sort of shield that shielded the stranger and himself. Such a greeting struck the stranger as being incredibly impolite. The plan's course has already been significantly disrupted, he said irritably, turning to the court magician. However, the court magician asserted that since all the magical circles in the capital had been destroyed, there was nothing else that could be done. At that moment, became aware that the stranger and the court magician were obviously working together. There was at least one bright side to all of this, though, as the stranger was not disappointed that his plans had been derailed because the castle guard had gone to handle the street chaos. At last, the stranger had the audacity to present himself to the king. This scoundrel was called Nils, and he was happy to meet the king. Nils worked for the magnificent and arrogant demon king. The king expressed gratitude to Nils for following protocol and expressed his desire for Nils to leave their castle in a courteous manner. However, Nils asserted that this was not feasible, for the demon king's resuscitation would soon be celebrated with a fun show. Nils therefore requested that the king keep him company. Beasts suddenly filled the king's chambers. Additionally, a particular bird touched Nils's shoulder. This was a unique monster, according to Nils, who had finished his training. Additionally, this bird's magic enables it to display everything it sees with its own eyes in a different location. With the aid of this bird and the screen above the castle, the entire capital would be able to witness the tragedy that would take place in the royal castle. Now let's get the show started. And we're standing outside at the moment, watching the events in the castle through the screen. While the courtiers attempted to battle the monsters he was calling forth, Nils remained motionless in the air in the king's chambers. The courtiers perished because they were unable to control the monsters, and their numbers only increased. And since the castle had a barrier protecting all of its windows and doors, Nils advised the courtiers who wanted to escape not to even attempt it. As examined Nils, she was astounded to learn that he had eliminated their warriors, protected himself from her magic, and simultaneously managed the barrier and magical circles. Evidently a demon, amazing strength. Nils was growing disinterested. Even though they weren't in a rush, he chose to inject some fun. He quickly made a sword and moved in the direction of the king. Everyone who attempted to approach Nils was simply carried away by the demon, despite a shout from someone in the courtiers' crowd to protect the king and the lady. The king then pulled out his sword, decided to postpone Nils, and gave the order to flee at all costs. Naturally, opposed it. However, the king asserted that if survived and he passed away, the royal line would not be disrupted. The girl's father had nothing against giving the younger generation responsibility for the future, and the king had already hurried into battle despite continued opposition. When Nils realized that the king himself would battle him, he was pleasantly surprised. The demon chose to view it as a privilege. The demon complimented the king on his age-appropriate strike when he attempted to hit Nils. Since he was the nation's king, the king asked Nils not to undervalue him. Although it was a good idea, Nils didn't find the king's murder to be all that interesting. Nils desired to murder the princess initially. The demon quickly pushed the king aside, causing the girl's father to crash into the wall. Had no idea what to do as the servants hurried to assist the king. Nils was in front of the girl before she had a chance to blink. It was evident that was afraid. She immediately put up a barrier to keep Nils from. However, the demon's strength was so strong that it broke the girl's barrier. Ultimately, was found sprawled out on the ground with numerous cuts. Nils came over to her right away. Raising his sword, he merely stated that he had to give his king the girl's life even though he did not want to kill such a beauty. His only thought at that moment was, she merely hoped for a miracle as she held the pendant he had given her during their first encounter. And an entire earthquake started just as Nils was about to pierce with his sword. Someone was obviously determined to create a hole in the castle roof, though it would be incorrect to say it was precisely that. And he was successful. The castle was flooded with sunlight. Was standing on the castle roof when looked up, an incredible individual, that was the girl's opinion of. Without hesitation, exploded inside, making Nils take a step back. Was not hit by the demon when the boy landed directly in front of her. Then, as Nils obviously did not anticipate it, his fist suddenly flew into his face. Nils was hit by a powerful blow which caused him to spin around multiple times before landing on the ground, then asked the shocked to say her name while holding out his hand. However, the boy believed that asking for a name without first introducing himself was inappropriate, chose to start by introducing himself. "Is my name," the boy added. If you don't take into account that he was from the same place as the hero savior, then he was just a regular village boy and is now just a mercenary. Now desired to know the princess's name. The girl then gave her name, with a tiny, charming smile and tears in her eyes. Was obviously flustered and liked the girl's name. Nils had already recovered and was starting to stand again at that point. Seeing this, informed that he had made all the decisions. The boy said he would do whatever it took to get. Furthermore, it made no difference that a demon and other monsters had chosen to murder the princess he had fallen in love with. Made the decision to smash everyone, and anyone who opposed it could attack him. Could not believe what she was seeing. The girl was certain of one thing though, would become a hero one day. And who said those things? Fascinating. After slamming into the floor, Glam didn't feel well. Unlike Glam, claimed that he didn't even have time for any additional movements following the jump. However, Glam still felt that performed admirably because of how quickly he punched Nils. Since the demon had already swung his sword at the helpless, wasn't shocked by that. Glam thought was a worthy man because of this, because he consistently goes above and beyond her expectations. In fact, he chose to punch through the ceiling rather than through windows or doors. Even though Glam doesn't really have a jaw, she acknowledged that she was so stunned that it nearly fell to the ground. After that, merely thanked Glam for another dumb joke. Let's go back to just before that point. Monsters blocked every door leading into the hall from the inside. Glam claims that a barrier prevented anyone from entering the windows, therefore smashed through the ceiling to enter the castle. Along the way, he told the girls everything about the princess, including how he reconnected with her following their initial chance encounter in the capital and the genuine emotions that had suddenly grown inside of him. And were asked to assist in saving the princess. He expected them to chastise him, but to his surprise, they happily agreed. Came to the realization that the girls already knew he had feelings for someone other than them, just like Glam did. It turned out that had been exposed a long time ago, even though he had assumed no one would ever know. He had no idea how to express his gratitude to and. Additionally, Anne entered the castle to assist when she broke through the ceiling, gave the girls the order to look after right away. He also intended to defeat that demon Nils. had no intention of letting this bastard get away with it because he was so angry that he had the audacity to touch his girl. Not only that, he threatened to tear out the demon's teeth. Glam said, "Only villains say stuff like that, especially with such an evil face." Nils's beast charged at that precise moment. However, was so furious that he just swept those creatures aside like dust. Nils was appalled by the opponent's strength as he watched everything. Then charged directly at Nils. They looked into each other's eyes with madness and hatred as their blades were so close to one another. Nils started by inquiring about his identity. In response, said he was just a regular backwoods no-show. Nils concluded that the boy was lying because he just didn't want to give an honest response. He had told the truth, or at least 80% of it, and froze. Glam asked if he had begun to doubt himself after noticing doubts flickering through his mind. Glam was told by to stop talking and making comments about his ideas. Then, since wouldn't crush Nils with just physical force, Glam instructed her to simply jump back on her signal. 1, 2, 3. Nils's sword missed as she leaped backward, then launched an attack, but the demon escaped. Was more than happy to smash that bastard's face when Glam told her to strike once more. However, Nils referred to him as a pitiful human and warned not to undervalue him, was magically pushed away by the demon. Glam encouraged to strike straight ahead despite the excruciating pain. Used enchantment to its fullest and slammed Glam into the ground just as Nils was about to cut him down, forcing him to retreat. Nils retreated, but it was obvious that he had no idea what that action even entailed. Glam inquired about his well-being. In response, said he was having trouble standing. Nevertheless, it was beneficial. It was simpler for the others to take action while occupied Nils. Nils began to move in his direction. He pointed out that was physically strong, but he didn't want to compliment the boy's technique. Was cautioned by Glam that Nils had likely cooled down for good. The demon was going to get serious, according to Glam. Was even a little let down because he had hoped to kill Nils while he was still furious. Nils acknowledged that he had assumed the hero savior would pose the greatest threat to his scheme. This was unexpected. He questioned about his true identity. With a sly smile, retorted that Nils had stated he didn't want an honest response. Nils snapped at that. He made the decision to outsmart. Glam alerted to the impending attack of the demon. And he did. Their weapons rang again as Nils lunged. Was holding out and pushing the demon back despite being worn out and barely able to stand. Nils observed that although he was on par with in terms of raw strength, he still outperformed him in terms of skill. Also recognized Nils's strength. Ultimately made the decision to use extreme measures that he had not wanted to. He pushed the boundaries of enchantment. Despite feeling the surge, Nils was able to avoid the subsequent blow. Glam observed how powerful their adversary was for responding so quickly. Warned Glam not to give Nils any praise because he would commit suicide at this rate. Just as was finishing her thought, Nils launched another attack. Despite not anticipating it, was still able to block and respond. They paused for a moment. Nils acknowledged that he was taken aback by sudden strength. However, he could also see that it was hurting him looked terrible, because those words came from a man who appeared perpetually pale, grinned. Nils went on to say that he regretted how things had turned out. Nils asserted that things would be different if the hero were present, but regrettably was insufficient to overcome him on her own. The demon was told to go to hell by. Glam knew that would suffer greatly in an exhaustion battle, and since everyone was restrained, there was no one to call for assistance. In an effort to keep him going, she continued to encourage him. Nils kicked in the stomach when he continued to resist falling. Despite falling to his knees, persisted. Despite his disapproval, Nils commended him for his resilience. Couldn't prevail, the demon declared. He couldn't figure out why the child was still pushing himself. Nils was baffled by strong resistance and his inability to murder this pathetic human. Nils lunged again without thinking, pushed himself back up and continued to struggle. Nils was unable to understand it. Why had refused to die despite being aware of the skill gap and still standing there in this pain? Human, why? The angry demon yelled, "Why can't I crush you?" Just then Nils's face developed a scratch had hit it, started giggling. He was pleased to have touched Nils at last. He was incomprehensible to Nils. He questioned whether had become stronger as a result of the fight, replied that he was unsure. More accurately, he had learned how to fight, avoid using enchantment at full capacity all the time. 1 second before the sword and spear collide, turn it on. This lessens the body's strain. The spear then moves more quickly because it is lighter. Clip the demon in this way. However, according to Glam, had only changed the ratio from 30 to 70 to 50 to 50. Was also aware of that. However, he continued to believe that he could defeat this demon. He didn't even think he would lose. Nils gazed at the insane, unable to comprehend his motivations. The demon thought the boy was merely fantasizing about being a hero. It wasn't like that at all, according to. So Nils asked directly, why was he fighting like this? Referred to the question as foolish. Nevertheless, he gave an explanation. They were his favorite girls, therefore felt that he was unable to humiliate himself in front of them, then lunged once more. He hurled his spear at Nils after that. Nils also carried an additional weapon on his back. Nils claimed had celebrated too soon when they were about to strike. Pulling the weapon from behind his back, he got ready to kill the defenseless. Nils was certain had gone too far. However, had an additional weapon, the charm he had received from the elderly man. He took out the dagger and gave the demon a direct blow to the nose. Then called forth Glam, who instantly materialized in his grasp. Finally, the final blow had arrived. Screamed loudly and wished for the demon's death as she attacked it. However, Nils was able to raise his sword to prevent the spear from piercing him. To what extent was the demon surprised when the spear started to break his sword? Then, at last, delivered the final blow to Nils. The man stood for a while after the altercation, trying to catch his breath. Everyone in the room, including, was staring at him at this point. The man's gleaming spear drew her in more. The girl was in awe of and his spear. People were so engrossed in the fight that they didn't realize it was over right away. Abruptly called out to. Went up to and told her that was the person she worked for and the brave hero of the future. Such words caused cheeks to flush and her eyes to shine even more brightly. Now came over to as well, taking the girl by the hand, she started tending to her injuries, acknowledged that she is envious of the princess. Was fighting solely for at the moment, after all, went on to say that adores the princess, so much so that is a little envious. Then acknowledged that her love for hasn't diminished. There was silence between the three of them after these words. Now that he realized what had happened, Nils brushed off his clothes and acknowledged that he had misjudged. The fact that the demon was still alive annoyed. He intended to eliminate this jerk immediately, but the demon appeared unaffected by anything. However, Nils was far more worn out than he appeared, according to. In addition, the demon's sword was broken, was not entirely sure what was discussing. Went on to explain that the demon's weapon was made of magical energy and that the demon's spiritual state directly affects how powerful it is. This implies that spirit is more powerful than the demon's if the weapon breaks. However, continued to advise not to unwind. She asserted that it was evident from Nils's face that he had a trump card of some sort. Then advised Nils to complete the task they had begun. At this point, Nils got to his feet and acknowledged that was just as dangerous to him as the heroic savior. What next? Asked. And this comes next. Nils encircled himself with a massive magic circle. An evil spirit of some sort started to emerge from it right away. Nothing could be done now, but this was the demon's trump card in the battle against the hero. Nils declared that he would stop at nothing to destroy. The king's chambers were suddenly occupied by a massive dragon that had emerged from the magic circle. This is the real power of Nils, the malevolent dragon. Was already tense at this point. He thought this was a dangerous situation. However, was obviously happy to see the enormous dragon, already soaked in perspiration from terror, angrily questioned about her happiness. All could hope for was that wouldn't even consider losing to this demon and his dragon. And although Nils asserted that he would murder in the name of the great demon king, believed there was no chance of success. Even so, I wish the man had something else, was now called upon to. Was the one who obviously wished for the man, I hoped would prevail in this conflict. Met's eyes directly, he read about the girl's concern for him and desire for him to succeed. and then called out the man as well, realized everything at that point. He needed this encouragement. All three had a lot of faith in their beloved and wished him luck. Made the decision that he would not lose at that point. Ultimately, the man was charged once more as though he hadn't engaged in combat 5 minutes prior. At this point was also celebrating, charged her and the girls charged her. Everyone was now prepared to face the malevolent dragon. At this point, asserted that was a true man. After all, this is precisely how a real hero expresses himself. Under the cries of girls behind his back and in the face of a formidable foe, the courageous hero is inspired by all of this. Concurred with as well, he felt that regardless of the nature of his adversary, he fights for a single reason. A man shouldn't approach girls he loves. Abruptly said that she was not a spear and that she had been lying to the man the entire time. Thought that since was now the one deserving of seeing her actual form, there was no longer a need to hide. Was aware of his lack of experience, but he possessed the spirit of the courageous hero she had been waiting for. Therefore aspired to be a real hero's weapon. She only asked to yell her real name now. Then let out a loud cry, "Come on!" Following this cry, a magnificent sword known as emerged from the spear known as. Nils was appalled at this. Panicked, he gave the order to immediately destroy, however had faith in. He urged the man to have faith in his own abilities and will, and let everyone know who is capable of eliminating any threat. At that moment, screamed and ran toward the dragon. "Anyone who harms my dear women will be destroyed by me." Without hesitation or fear, flew at the dragon. He was certain that he would vanquish this monster. And so it took place, split the dragon in half with ease. The dragon's only option after taking such a blow was to die and fall to the ground. At this point, Nils appeared to be immobile and did not trust what he was seeing. Had just used a single blow to eliminate his strongest trump card, unimaginable. Thus, partner's new heroic epic begins. After everything was finished, the royal castle was being repaired by the king's servants. In front of the king and were on their knees. Was extremely anxious and had no idea what he was doing here. Was lying next to the man. He asked the man to wait, but he could understand him. The man had done a great job and should be proud of himself, he said, so was here for a reason. Following that fight, fainted a week ago. Then, seemingly as a substitute, and his group stormed into the castle. Unfortunately, though, that demon was still able to elude capture. Even so, after all of this chaos, there weren't many human casualties. They did, however, let one demon get away. What is there to be sorry about? By the way, the broadcast in the square stopped when broke the demon's sword, so the people were unable to witness the man cutting the dragon in half. People now think that merely bought time until the arrival of the rescuer. To be honest, that was about right, so didn't protest, however, became furious. Additionally, asked the man to raise his head when he appeared before the king. Looked up, first focusing on the stunning who was wearing an exquisite dress. Felt even more ashamed when the girl grinned. Despite the fact that was already a princess, he thought she looked like one. Even though he understood the youth, made the decision to rouse and asked him to look at the king. Turned to face the king and started talking about the man's genuine bravery, and the nation would have suffered greatly in his absence. Both the king and his daughter might have perished. The king thanked for this. Was unsure of how to respond, suggested that he express how honored he was to hear this. That was response to the king. The king also stated that he was sadly unable to inform the populace of his bravery. Became slightly irate at these remarks but saw it in time and calmed her by taking her hand. As everyone had already heard, the king asserted that the demon serves the demon king himself. The people will have hope for victory in the upcoming conflict with the army of darkness if they think that the savior hero himself defeated him. The king expressed regret too for this, but politics. Himself had a similar thought. Other than that, they talked about him in an odd way. Additionally, the king at the time stated that he was not so blatant as to overlook his accomplishment. He also pledged to give the man a substantial reward even though he was unable to reveal the truth in public. What does want? The king inquired. Naturally, the king pledged to grant all of his requests to the best of his abilities. Then turned to and the girls gave the guy their approval after quickly understanding him. Then decided what to do. He told the king that he didn't require fame, wealth, or land. The man only wanted one thing. desired the daughter of the king. The girl's face flushed with shame upon hearing this. The king couldn't understand. He made the decision to ask if he understood his request, firmly responded that he understood everything. Nevertheless, the king made an effort to convince otherwise. He started making offers for him to become a close retainer or to acquire wealth that would last a lifetime. However, refused to back down. All he needed was. The king then declared that his daughter was exceptionally intelligent and that he had intended for her to marry the savior hero at some point. Became aware that the girl had been discussing during their walk at that precise moment. When saw that the king was obviously not pleased with this request, he informed him that if his wish could not be granted, he would just leave without making any further requests. In that scenario, would refuse a reward. The king inquired once more. The man responded that he did not wish for fame and fortune in place of, because his feelings for the king's daughter were not so trivial. The king was already moved by these remarks. He was at a standstill because of, however, the king did not retract his statements, ultimately prevented his nation from being destroyed. At the same time, the king was unable to provide the man with what he wanted. The king then made the decision to question about why he required at all. Firmly responded that he loves in response. After giving it some more thought, the king made the decision to find out's opinion on the matter, turned to face and inquired if he had the dagger she had given him. After searching, pulled out that exact sword. The king was shocked to see it. Speaking to the king, announced that she had given this dagger. Those in attendance were startled at that point and started whispering, spun around, but she was still baffled by the disturbance. The king made a snap judgment about's feelings because he understood the significance of such gifts. Herself expressed her genuine feelings for the man without holding back. Admitted that she loved while grinning and feeling ashamed. She also wants what he wants. The girl stated that she wants to be a part of as well. Was greatly embarrassed by these remarks. Understanding that was overjoyed by his remarks, made the decision to inform him of the long-standing custom in this nation of giving a sword to the person you truly love. Everyone was agitated because of this. Himself finally understood that this sword-shaped gift was akin to a love letter. The king then questioned about the hero who had saved the day. The girl said she would come up with something in response. According to the royal family is the only one with the right to marry. Additionally, there was nothing to object to because no official decision of this kind had been made. Since he will form ties with the entire nation if she marries, asked her father to make his own decision. He also briefly engaged a demon in equal combat and sliced a dragon in two. Is there anyone in this country capable of doing the same? The girl then asked her father. His mouth hung open as he gazed at, enjoyed the princess's speech as well. Ultimately, the girl's statement was quite audacious. The king concurred that a relationship with would benefit the nation just as much as one with the savior hero, but he also decided to clarify something to his daughter. According to the king, is a member of the royal family and is a commoner. And granting's wish might put something unpleasant at risk. However, asserted that she was prepared for anything or else she wouldn't have expressed her emotions. The king realized that the girl was prepared for anything at this point. Then he made a clarification. According to the rules, even though he would be far down the line, spouse must also be entitled to the throne. However, would not have this privilege because she is a commoner. This also holds true for she would be incapable of assuming the throne. The girl's lack of interest in that was evident to the king himself. Made the decision to find out if the king intended for to sever her family ties. The king responded that this would not occur at all, was at ease in that situation. The king then decided to grant's wish after giving it some final thought. And were both shocked by this statement. The king saw a shocked expression, but he couldn't figure out why. Responded that he just assumed the king would be uncooperative or make some sort of demand. The king retorted that he had previously proposed a requirement that give up her claim to the throne. Furthermore, his daughter, who is typically serious and selfless, had asked her father for something for the first time in her life. The fact that his daughter had finally turned to him made the king even happier. The king realized that depending on his position, he might be behaving improperly. However, he was certain that he was behaving appropriately as a person. The king then spoke to, telling him that since he has high expectations for him, the man should definitely invite him to the wedding. The king is still's father after all. This time, the castle hosted a magnificent dinner. After everything was finished, fell onto his bed exhausted. His return pleased, he also saw that the man was very worn out. It's true that was exhausted, and he accused of being lazy. Weapons do not attend magnificent dinners, retorted, agreed with this fact, then made the decision to inquire about how everything went, responded that he had not experienced anything noteworthy. However, and who attended the dinner as well were outstanding, liked just as much as the others did, deduced from these remarks that spent the entire dinner admiring the girls. He made the decision to inform the man that, in reality, he had emerged as the dinner's main hero. Found the entire story to be problematic. He was obviously exhausted. The man just made an effort to blend in as much as possible, but it was still exhausting. In that instance, just chose to go to bed. Abruptly, though, the door was knocked on. Given that it was already late, was even a little irritated by this. Nevertheless, the man opened the door for the unexpected visitor and lifted his butt off the bed. Behind the door stood, he most certainly did not anticipate seeing him of all people. The guys chose to go out onto the balcony to chat. Late at night, asked what he wanted from him while yawning and idly scratching the back of his head. Responded that the whole point was that he and had not been able to see each other lately and that they were not even permitted to speak at the banquet. Asserted that he merely chose to take a chance and converse. Asked what he wanted to discuss because he believed that he was correct. It was a pretty good question, felt lost because he had so many options. At last, the man started to mention that he had heard that had wed lady. Initially looked down on the marriage before realizing that it was, in fact, a marriage, then made the decision to congratulate first. It turned out that he had taken his bride away from him, which made feel a little uncomfortable. That was true, said, laughing. Although acknowledged that lady is a stunning girl and that he genuinely admires her, he surmised that someone else had her heart. At least he wouldn't be held responsible for, so could finally relax. Even so, the man was unwilling to give in to in this situation. There was a brief pause before referred to as cool. After all, had already joined the royal family before he could even turn around, and until recently had been an ordinary villager. After saying such things, thought was just making fun of him, but said he admires because he left the village and accomplished everything on his own. Didn't believe that. Because he was accompanied by and lastly, was certain that it was only because of them that he was able to accomplish everything. Is cool, though, because he still thought was the one who attracted these people to himself, because no one else would have accomplished that in his place. Could already tell that was giving him too much praise at this point. However, disagreed, his eyes were crazy and he looked at in a different way. The man claimed to have known was that type of person for a long time. Asserted that each time finds herself at the center of significant events, she observes things that others have missed. Acknowledged that while he admired, it was excruciatingly painful for him. Had been assisting up until this point because he believed he had to continue being the hero who saved the day. Indeed, was acknowledged by a large number of people. Even though was not relied upon, he consistently receives more praise than anyone else. It also occurred this time. According to it occurs accidentally. The man acts, so to speak, as a precaution and unintentionally proves to be correct. Asserted that he unintentionally turned in the correct direction this time as well. However, refused to back down. He asserted that is always 2 steps ahead of him and consistently produces the best outcome when it matters most. The battle was nearly over by the time arrived at the castle. Additionally, was only able to defeat weak monsters. Also made the decision to bring up the Kobold King case, or even earlier, back in the village with, was so annoyed by all of this that he balled his fists. According to, he doesn't desire fame or recognition. He doesn't try to be the savior hero for that reason. That's not the thing that hurts the guy. Simply put, had long harbored feelings of envy and jealousy toward, at that point, realized why had brought him to the capital. And he proved to be correct. In addition to wanting a conversation partner, had other goals in mind. He also desired recognition from, attempted to carry out the savior hero's responsibilities in order to get attention. Ultimately, though, continued to avoid, chose to apologize to while sulkily scratching the back of his head. He made the decision that he would never again tell that he had accompanied him merely to admire a stunning girl. There is nothing horrible about this circumstance, according to, all he wants to do is spark curiosity about and come from the same village after all, was a bumpkin but was a hero. Although that may not sound very pleasant, was in a better position overall, but eventually and even him. According to, it's not just about fighting. The same is true for girls, then questioned whether was referring to and recognized that had already solved every problem. He acknowledged that Anne could be the hero's allies, had considered it but was still unsure, then added that when he went to visit the girls they turned him away, ultimately once more surpassed. Yelled because she could take it no more. He had no idea why he had even brought to the capital, because he was shown his place once more. He looked like a clown, thought. The man merely asked to give him an explanation of everything. He couldn't comprehend why a banal bumpkin rather than a hero accomplished so much, was perplexed by his constant superiority. And the primary query, what distinguishes the two men from one another? What distinguishes the brave hero from the savior hero? However, himself did not comprehend why he was referred to as the brave hero by everyone. The savior hero, according to, battles for the needs of others. Furthermore, the courageous hero is a total moron who puts his own life in danger. Therefore, if the chosen person is referred to as the savior hero, then the brave hero is the one who makes his own decision. Then made the decision to pose a follow-up query to, he wanted to know why fights. Uncertainly, responded that he fights because he is a hero. Then questioned why is a hero, was perplexed by his intentions. The man was then told by that he was the savior hero because a god had selected him, then why, prior to that, did take charge of the volunteer defenders. According to, all of this was done to express gratitude to those who had raised him, asked what was wrong with his guess after confirming it, responded that there is nothing negative about it, in fact, it is commendable. Next, questioned about why he fights. The man responded that he had always stood up for himself. This, in his opinion, is the primary distinction between and himself. However, was still unable to comprehend anything. Then made the decision to pose one more query. So did wish to be the hero who saved the day. However, held that a hero is not created by one's own will, but rather is selected by the goddess. Didn't give a damn if a princess or the goddess selected the hero. His only concern was desire to become a hero. At that moment, gave it some thought, was aware that the man had no desire to become a hero, and his issue was that he makes every effort to satisfy the wishes of others, although it appears fantastic from the outside, sees himself as a puppet. Was offended by the remarks about a puppet, however, asserted that he is one, just a puppet controlled by the desires of others, is exactly that. Then yelled angrily that he is not a puppet and that he has free will as well. Then inquired as to whether this implied that had no second thoughts about being selected as a hero, fell silent at that point, and asserted that the man was simply given a great deal of responsibility in order to save the world, and he unquestionably agreed to become a hero. Went on to say that he had his doubts. After all, it would be more difficult to keep the village safe after his departure. Stated that he was considering becoming a hero and leaving everyone behind for this. In the end, still had nothing against becoming the hero who saved the day, continued, nervously urged to hold off on drawing conclusions. The man stated that he chose the path of a hero because he had the support of his parents and the villagers, however, thought just let other people make the decision for him. Became agitated due to the conversation and the overall atmosphere. Without uttering a word, he took by the top of his clothes. His irate expression was self-explanatory. Was taken aback by his ability to pull such a face. Not letting go of the man, responded that he also did not anticipate that he would experience such emotions. Was merely attempting to explain to that he does not keep up with him because he always and everywhere cares only about other people. The main distinction is that acts for his own desires while acts for those of others. Then questioned what would happen if his desires were different from those of other people. Asked if he was scared of being reprimanded while grinning and referring to him as a good boy. Became enraged once more when made fun of him. However, reiterated his earlier statement, he does not care what other people think and acts as he pleases. in that instance was perplexed and chose to inquire as to why battled the demon, retorted that he only battled the demon because his beloved girl was in danger. In that instance, believed that continued to act on behalf of others, indicating that they were all the same. However, asserted that he didn't act on behalf of others. According to the man, is a part of him, includes and promised that if something were to happen to these three girls, he would do everything in his power to save them. However, thought these were just plain gibberish. Then pushed away from him and reiterated that he fights against his will because he is the hero who saves the day. Was already trembling and sweating from all the understanding and the atmosphere. He didn't think was telling the truth, however, most likely just did not want to accept the truth. Went on to say that being selected as a hero and becoming a hero are two different things, and won't have any hope until he realizes this. However, was unaware of the situation in which he would be hopeless. He can go anywhere and still be himself, according to, what about though, will he be able to stay forever? This, in his opinion, was not at all an answer, then stated it in a different way, won't be able to defeat until he realizes this. Made the decision to go to his place after such a heated discussion because he had been severely beaten in battle today and was sick of banquets. However, then asked to respond to one more question, paused and chose to pay attention to. Then questioned about what would happen if their desires clashed, thought this question was pointless. According to the man, he doesn't care if his adversary is a king, a demon, or the demon king even himself. Asserted that he would shove aside anyone who gets in his way.